Every real world application that you see today, be it a banking app or an e-commerce platform or some fintech systems, they all have one thing in common: security. Imagine you're building a Spring Boot application with perfectly written APIs and a clean architecture. But anyone can access your APIs, anyone can read or modify your data, and anyone can act as any user. That is not a bug, that is a missing security layer. And this is exactly where Spring Security comes in. It is not just about login and logout, it is a powerful security framework that handles authentication, authorization. It gives your application protection against common attacks, and most importantly, you would have a complete control over who can access what and when. For example, you could configure that an admin should be able to add or delete users, whereas a normal user should only read the data, and a privileged user might be able to both write as well as read data, and an unauthenticated user should not be able to access anything at all. So Spring Security decides all of this at runtime. So let me start by giving you a code walkthrough. I have created a controller class. In this class, there are three APIs: hello, hey, and hi. So these are three very simple APIs. This one is returning a string saying hello world. This one returns hey world, and this returns hi world. Okay. Now in the pom.xml, I have added two dependencies as of now. One is the starter dependency. Okay, Spring Boot Starter Web. So as you already know that for any web application, you have to add this dependency. It gives you all the relevant classes that you need for the project startup. And this one is the Spring Boot Starter Security. So this is the dependency that we have to add for the Spring Security. Okay. So let me just comment this dependency for now. I'll reload the Maven and I'll just run my project. Okay. So my application started on port 8080, and if I just go to the browser and I hit the API localhost 8080/hello. Okay, so you will see that hello world is printed. Similarly, for hey, we will get this output, and for hi, again we will get the output. Okay, so as of now, there is no security. You can easily access these APIs. You just have to hit them using the browser. Okay, now let's say I uncomment this Spring Security dependency. Okay, I just uncomment this. I'll reload my Maven and I'll rerun my project. Alright, so now the application is again up on 8080. If I go to the browser and hit my API, great. So you will see that a security layer has been added automatically. Okay, so as of now, you have not done anything. You just added the Spring Security dependency and a login credential page has been created for you. Okay, so you have to give some username and password, then only you can access your API. Alright, now what is the username and what is the password? We don't know yet, but you must observe that just by adding the dependency, a login form has been created and you have to give the credentials, then only you can access the APIs. Alright, so that is why it is called form-based authentication. So by default, just by adding the dependency, you get a form-based authentication. Okay, so what is the username? Let's try user. Okay, simple. Let's just try user. And for the password, you will see that when we started our application, in the logs, a password has been generated. Okay, so as you added this dependency, at the time of project startup, a password will be created automatically. Now it is not a very strong security layer because obviously this password is printed in the logs and this is auto generated by Spring. Even you didn't, generate this password. Okay, so definitely this is not a very strong security layer, but for starting we have this security. Okay, so let me just copy this. I'll go to the browser and I'll try to log in. Great. So now you can access your API. Okay, now let's say I hit this API. You will see that you can directly access this API without without have to log in again. Okay, you don't have to log in again. So once you log in, after that you can access any of your API. Okay, you will see that this is the third one, and if I just hit it, okay, I'll reload it, you will see that it's not asking for the login again. Okay, so this is how it works. A login form has been created. You just have to enter your credentials and then you are logged in, and then you can access any of your APIs. Okay, now let's say I change my browser. Okay, I'll just go to the incognito mode. All right, now if I try to access the API again, let's say localhost 8080/hey, you will see that it is again asking for the login. All right, so this is what happens whenever you try to access your APIs from one browser. You have to log in the beginning, and then you can access your APIs as many times as you want. But if you'll change your browser, then you will have to log in again. Okay, so I'll just log in, but the password will still be the same. Okay, this will be the same password, and if I just enter it here, sign in, great. So you will see that I'm able to access my API. Similarly, I can access other APIs like this, and let's say /hello. Okay, this one was hey, hi, and hello. All right, so now I can access all the three APIs. Okay, so what exactly is happening behind the scene? Right, like how did this happen? Why did you have to log in only once? And when you change the browser, why did you have to log in again? Okay, so all these things are related to something called as session ID. Basically, a session is created behind the scene and a unique session ID has been generated somewhere, which is maintaining all of this. Okay, so let me go back to IntelliJ and we'll repeat this process, and I'll try to explain all of this using a session ID. Okay, now I'll run my project again. Great. So you will see that whenever we run our project again, a new password is generated. Okay, so as long as my project was up, I could reuse the same password. If I wanted to log in at different browsers, I could use the same password. But if I will run my project again, then always a new password will be generated. Okay, so this is something you should know. All right, so I'll go to the browser. Okay, I'll try to access my API localhost 8080/hi, and you will see that it will ask for a login form. Okay, so this time what I'll do is I'll just inspect the APIs. All right, so whenever we open this inspect tool, sometimes it gives us this pop-up that we have to sign in again. Okay, so I'll just cancel it. All right, it doesn't matter, and I'll just pass user, and in the password I'll copy this new password. Okay, and I'll paste it. All right, so this time when I'll sign in, I actually get some error here, but you can ignore this error because I just opened the dev tools and I was inspecting this API. So sometimes this happens, but actually you have been authenticated. Okay, and I'll show you that as well, that you have been authenticated. But the main thing that we need to see here is that this login API was hit, and in this login API, we got something called as JSESSIONID. Okay, we got a unique session ID, and this we get in the response headers. Okay, so when this API was hit, in the response we got a session ID, and this we got in this cookie. Okay, this is saved inside the cookie of this browser. Now if I'll hit my API, I'll try to access the API. Again, I will open the inspect element. Okay, I'll just clear this out. Yeah, so when I'll hit this API, you can see that we have been authenticated. As I told you that there was no issue in that we have been authenticated. And okay, we can just check this API, and in the request headers of this API, in the cookie here, you will see that we are passing a JSession ID. Okay, and if you look carefully, this JSession ID is same as the one that we got in the response of this login API. Okay, this is something 9132 ending with 5C7, and in the request headers of this API we have the same JSession ID. All right, so this is how it happens. Whenever you will hit the API, always you will pass this JSession ID. Basically the browser will pass it automatically, and it will always be the same. Okay, I'll show you for the other APIs as well. Let's say I hit /hello. Okay, I'll just inspect this, reload my page. Okay, so you will see this is the same JSession ID. Okay, similarly for hey, if I inspect my API, great. So in the request headers, we have this JSession ID. All right. So this is how the server knows that this user is authenticated. What happens is whenever you log in, at the time of login, the server just checks your credentials. If it matches, that means you are authenticated, and it generates a session. And that session ID, which is basically a unique identifier of that session ID is returned in the response of that API, of the login API. And after that, in every API call, that JSession ID will be passed in the request headers. Okay, like this. And this will be used at the backend to confirm that whether the user is authenticated or not. So that is why you don't have to log in again and again. Okay, so this is how the whole authentication process takes place. You log in only once, a session is created behind the scene, and a session ID is passed back in the response, and then for every further API call, the browser sends this session ID in the cookie in the request headers. Okay, now if I change my browser, let's say I try to hit the API in the incognito mode, I will have to log in again. Now why? This is because this session ID is actually stored in the cookies, and every browser have their own cookies. So actually this incognito window doesn't have any information about the JSession ID that we just created there. Okay, so that is why if I just inspect here as well, okay, you will see that I have to use the same password, which is fine. Okay, the password remains the same for both the windows, for both the browsers, but JSession ID will be different. Okay, I'll just hit this. Again, we can ignore this error. In this login, you will see that in the response headers, we got another JSession ID, which is different from the one that we got in the Chrome window. Okay, now if I just hit this API, you will see that we are authenticated, and this JSession ID that is passed here in the request headers, this 10460, this one actually matches the one that we got here. Okay, so this is how we can create multiple sessions for a single user. Okay, so in different browsers we have different sessions, and each session have their own unique JSession ID, and this ID is actually used for the authentication purpose. Okay, so you can see that if I have logged in here, that doesn't mean that I cannot access this API here. I am running multiple sessions at the same time. Okay, so I will just hit this again, and you will see that this session is also maintained. Okay, with the JSession ID as 9132 something, and in the incognito browser we have a different JSession ID. Okay, now how long does this JSession ID holds? Basically, how long does this session remains active? So obviously there is some expiry time. Okay, if you are inactive for some amount of time, then this JSession ID will expire and you won't be able to access the APIs. So I guess by default the expiry time is I think 30 minutes or 60 minutes. Okay, so we can just check that out. But the point is that is configurable. You can configure that thing and change it according to you. And there is one more way to actually finish this session. You can simply log out. Okay, you can log out from this session. So I'll show you that as well. I will just have to call it like this, localhost/8080/logout. Okay, it just gives, are you sure you want to log out? We'll select yes. And now again, you won't be able to access any of these APIs. Okay, every time you will have to sign in. Right, so here again the password is same. User is the username. Okay, the username is always user, and the password is the same that I copied from IntelliJ. So if I just log in again, okay, I'll ignore this. I'll log in. In the login, this time in the cookie, we get a different JSession ID. Okay, this is altogether different because we have started a new session. And now if I hit this, let's say I'll hit this localhost 8080/hi. Okay, this time in the request headers, we have this new JSession ID B7E65, and here as well you can see this is B7E65. Alright, so this is the whole authentication process. You have to log in only once, and as soon as you log in, a session is created at the backend, It just returns a JSession ID in the response header, and that JSession ID is passed throughout all the API hits, okay, in the request headers. And the other thing that we must learn, that it is passed inside the cookie, and we have different cookies for different browsers. That is why when we maintain a session in one browser, it does not affect the other one. Okay, so you have to log in again in the different session in the different browser. And you will also see, I'll also show you in the incognito, that here since we didn't log out here, so if I'll just reload my API, I can just access it because we logged out from the different browser. Okay, now it's a little weird that we are using the username and password that Spring gave us. Okay, so we should be able to configure it ourselves. So I'll show you how we can do that. It's very simple. In the application.properties, we just have to add a property that says spring.security.user.name is equal to, let's say I give the name as the curious coder. Similarly, I can also configure the password. Instead of name, we'll give password. Let's say I keep it simple, 1 2 3 4 5. I'll just rerun it. Okay, so this time you will see that there is no auto-generated password. Your application is up. And now when I log in, okay, so I will have to pass the new credentials, the curious coder, and 1 2 3 4 5. Great. So we just logged in. Okay. Now you will observe one thing, that in the backend we haven't done much, right? We just added one dependency, and so far we have got these many things. We got a form based authentication, we got some session based authentication. Okay, we could configure our username and password. So there is something in the code that must have been added after we just we place the dependency in the pom.file. So definitely in the code something must have been added. Okay, so now in the next part of the video, I'll just I'll just tell you about the architecture, the basic classes that come into play when this dependency is added, and how this form based and session based authentication is taking place. Okay, so I'll just give you a walkthrough about that. All right, so let's understand the architecture. When we add the Spring security dependency, Spring automatically adds something called a security filter chain. A security filter chain is nothing but a chain of filters. Now, what are filters? A filter is a component that intercepts every incoming HTTP request, and it performs some logic before the request reaches the controller, and sometimes even after the response is generated. Now, the difference between a filter and an interceptor is that filters come into play even before the dispatcher servlet, and they are actually part of the servlet API. Whereas interceptors are something that intercept request after it passes through the dispatcher servlet. I have explained all of this in detail in a different video about interceptors versus filters. Now coming back to Spring Security. In Spring Security, authentication, authorization, session handling, exception handling, all of these are done using filters. Before your controller method is ever called, the request passes through multiple security filters. So for form-based authentication, the filter that comes into play is username password authentication filter. So when you enter username, password and click on login, the request never directly goes to your controller. It first comes to username password authentication filter. Now the big question, how does authentication actually happen? Authentication means that the credentials entered by the user must be matched with the real credentials, right? So yes, the username and password you entered must be compared with the actual stored credentials. Now where are the real credentials stored? That actually depends on the authentication mechanism. In our case, Spring Security generated some default credentials, so they were stored in memory. Later, we defined those credentials in the application.properties ourselves. There also, they were stored in the in-memory. Okay, but there are other possibilities. Credentials might be stored in some external database, or there is OAuth 2 authentication, there is JWT based authentication. So each of these requires different authentication logic. This is why Spring Security does not put authentication logic inside the filters because it keeps them lightweighted. Instead, that logic is delegated to something called authentication providers. So, providers is where real authentication logic lives, and we have different providers for specific types of authentication logic. Now, how does a filter know which provider to use? This is managed by an interface named Authentication Manager. Filters do not directly call providers. Instead, Spring Security use this intermediate interface, Authentication Manager, and its main implementation is Provider Manager class. Now, so far, the flow is username password authentication filter receives the login request. It creates an authentication object which contains the username and the password, and then it passes this object to the authentication manager. Now comes the key part. Provider manager has a list of authentication providers. It loops through all the providers, calls a method named supports on each provider, and finds the provider capable of handling the authentication type. So for a login based authentication, the correct provider is DAO authentication provider. DAO authentication provider is the one that contains the core logic. This is where actual credential matching happens. Inside this provider, username is used to fetch user details from in-memory, and password entered by the user is compared with the password in these user details. So if the password matches, the authentication is successful. If it does not match, then bad credentials exception is thrown. This is the whole login based authentication architecture. Now once the authentication is successful, Spring Security creates a security context and the authenticated user details are stored inside it. This security context must be preserved for future requests. This is where session based authentication comes into play. Now where is the session actually created? Spring Security does not directly create sessions. No. Session is created by the servlet container. That is Tomcat in our case. Spring Security fetches this session by calling request.getSession, and the JSESSIONID is then passed back in the response header. Now what happens on the next request? The browser sends the JSESSIONID inside the request header, and Spring Security reads the ID and matches it in the security context. If user is already authenticated, then no login required again. Otherwise, they would have to log in because that means that they are trying to log in for the first time. Okay, so this is how session based authentication works. Now what I'll do is I'll show you all the classes that we just discussed in the architecture. We'll go through their code, but you don't have to learn the code line by line. In fact, you don't even have to understand all the code. It's just that I'm trying to make a mental picture of what exactly is happening behind the scene. Okay, so first let's look at this class, the username password authentication filter. In this filter, we have this method attempt authentication. Okay, so the request lands here. Here we have the username and the password. So the first thing that it does is it wraps this username and password inside the object of username password authentication token. Okay, so we just create this object and here we pass the username and password. Okay, then the authentication manager is called to actually authenticate the request. Okay, so actually the providers will be called, but first authentication manager will come into play. Okay, so we have this interface authentication manager and one of its implementation is provider manager. Okay, so in this authenticate method, as I said, it has a list of all the providers and it just loops over them, and eventually here it will call the authenticate method. Okay, so we will in our case we will get the DAO authentication. So when I go to this authenticate, if I look at all the implementations, you will actually not find the DAO provider because this is the parent class which gets called, this abstract user details authentication provider. Here we have this retrieve user, and this retrieve user is actually in the DAO class. Okay, so this is the DAO authentication provider. So I'll just repeat again. Basically, when the authenticate was called by the authentication manager, okay, this provider manager called the authenticate method. Here we don't have the DAO provider directly, but we have its parent class, which is this abstract user details authentication provider. So we go here and at this point the user details are fetched. As I told you, in the provider the user details are fetched and the password is matched. Okay, so at this point we are fetching the user details, and this retrieve user method is actually part of the DAO authentication provider. Okay, so you can see that user details are loaded using the input username, okay, from this user detail service. And after that, if I go back, yeah, so this user is retrieved. After this, if there is some issue here, like the username was not found, so it will just give bad credentials. And after this it has some additional authentication checks. This is where the password gets matched. Okay, so you will see that the password that is present in the user details is actually matched with the one that is there in the input. Okay, so the presented password and the user details dot get password. So if they match, then it's fine. If they don't match, then it gives a bad credentials exception. Okay, so these are some of the classes and interfaces that are into play. You don't have to learn them all, but you must have some idea about the architecture, and you should actually know how, just by adding the Spring Security dependency, we got a login based authentication and then a session based authentication. All right. Hello and welcome to my channel, The Curious Coder. This video is part of my ongoing Spring Security series. In this video, we are going to understand what a CSRF attack is and how Spring Security prevents it using a CSRF token. So what is CSRF? CSRF stands for Cross-Site Request Forgery. Let's understand this with a real-life scenario. Imagine this. You're on your browser and you're logged in on some legitimate website. Maybe it's your bank, your email, or any other trusted application. Now assume you visit some other site, but it is pure evil. You don't know that it's malicious. Maybe you were searching for some pirated movie download, or you clicked on some pop-up, but somehow you landed on an evil site. So what this evil site does is, it somehow pretends to be that legitimate client where you were logged in and then hit their API. Okay, so if your application is not CSRF protected, then its APIs are exposed to a CSRF attack. So your money might be deducted, or your stocks may be tampered, or you may be logged out from your own account. Okay, things like these. So in short, that is what a CSRF attack is. An evil website pretending to be a legitimate client where the user is already logged in and then hitting their API. Okay, now how exactly do they do that? Let's find out. If someone gets a hold of this JSESSIONID, then that means that they can access your APIs. Okay, because at the server, we are using this JSESSIONID only to authenticate the user. Alright, so you will see that if I hit my API again, every time this JSESSIONID is passed. Alright, this is exactly what an evil site does. It somehow gets a hold of this JSESSIONID, and this is how it pretends to be a legitimate client and they hit your API. Okay, so you think that you are on a different website, but internally they are hitting your API and they are sending the JSESSIONID to the browser or to the server, and the server does not recognize that it is something evil. Okay, they think that it's a legitimate request, and that is why the API is accessed, because they have your JSESSIONID. Now, how do they get hold of your ID? That is the main question. So the thing is, you can see that this ID is sent in a header called cookie. Okay, so by default, the web browser saves this session ID inside a cookie, and in every API hit to this application, to the local host, they will automatically send this JSESSIONID. Okay, that is a browser behavior. Alright, so I'll repeat, you're on a different site. Internally, they'll be hitting your API only, basically this local host only, and automatically the browser will send that JSESSIONID, and the server will think that okay, it is a legitimate request, and they will just access that API. Okay, they will let that evil site access that API. Alright, so let me show you this. I'll give a demo about this and we'll actually replicate a CSRF attack. So I have created this HTML page. It is a demo for a CSRF attack. So you can consider it like a replication of some evil website, a website which internally calls your API. Okay, you can see that there is a form that is actually calling localhost 8080/hello. Alright, so let me just log in and log out again just for a better understanding. Okay, I will first log out from this localhost. Okay, and let's say we log in again. 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, there is some issue, but I guess if I access the API, yeah, I'm able to log in. I'm logged in. Okay, I'll just keep a note of the session ID as well. If I hit this again, you can see that the JSession ID is something 8524 and in the end it is BD7. Okay, keep a note of it. Alright, now what I'll do is I'll just open this HTML page. Great. So as a user, what you see here is that you are on some website where you think that you might win an iPhone, and there is this heading that says click here for a free gift, and here there is a button that says claim your gift. Okay, so you were logged in on this localhost, but now you are on a different website and you have no idea that internally this will be hitting this application's URL. Okay, you have no idea about that. Alright, so if you just click on claim gift, great. You see that actually localhost 8080/hello has been hit, and you can see the response as hello world. So the API of this application was hit by this evil website because it had a hold of the session ID. Okay, let me show you that as well, that how it got a hold of session ID. So I'll just, open this HTML page again. This time we'll inspect the element. In the network tab, when I hit on claim gift, you will see that internally this hello has been hit, and in the cookie you see that the JSession ID was automatically passed by the browser. Okay, and it is the same JSession ID that we kept a note of earlier. Alright, so that is the problem with JSession ID. The browser stores it in a cookie and automatically sends it whenever your API is hit. So any site can just show some pop-up, and internally they can just keep the API URL of your application, and browser will automatically give them the JSession ID. That is what a CSRF attack is. Now if you're not logged in, let's say you just log out from your application. Okay, you have logged out, and now if I try to replicate this attack, okay, if I try to claim the gift, here I'm not able to access that API because as of now as a user I'm not logged in this localhost, and since I'm not logged in, the evil site does not have a hold of my credentials. No, the credentials are not there. But if I would have logged in, the JSession ID they can access because that is stored in the cookies, and that the browser automatically sends. Alright, so I think this is clear how a CSRF attack happens. Now there is one question that might be coming into your mind as well, that we added a Spring Security dependency. Then how am I able to still replicate a CSRF attack? Does Spring Security do not care about CSRF, or we don't have any CSRF protection? So no, actually that's not true. The thing is that the APIs that we have created are all GET APIs. Okay, and Spring Security does not give us protection for these GET APIs. Does not give us CSRF protection for these GET APIs. Why? Because I want to clear one concept. When we access this API, okay, when they were able to access this hello world, so actually they can access the session ID, yes, they hit your API, yes, but the evil site does not have a hold of the response. They actually cannot access your response. Okay, so the browser automatically sends the JSession ID. That's true. Because of that, a different site is able to access your API. That is also true. But the response that we get from that API, that is not shown to the evil site. Okay, this as a user you can see this. That is fine. But the evil site does not get a hold of this response. So actually we do not need any CSRF protection for a GET API because they anyway won't be able to access the response, and the GET API does not do anything else. Okay, it does not make any state change. Okay, it's not like that in a GET API your money will be deducted. And if it is like that, then that means that's a problem in your architecture. Okay, the way that you have written your API, that is wrong. You should not do any state change operation in your GET API. It should always just return some data. It should not make any database changes. Okay, it should not do any write operation. Okay, so the crux is that for a get API we don't need a CSRF protection, and that is why Spring Security has not given us any. But for a post API, let's say I'll create a different controller altogether. Okay, we have a bank controller. All right, and let's say I just write an API private or not private public void debit. Okay, and it just returns, okay, I'll just make it string. It returns money deducted. Alright, so in reality it will not return a string value, it will actually deduct the money. Okay, it will perform a write operation on the database and it will deduct your money, it will debit your money. But here I'm just showing it like this. Okay, so we have a post mapping on it. Let's say /debit. Okay, and here I'll add the rate rest controller and then add the rate request mapping. This will be /bank. Okay, so I have added this API and I'll just rerun my project. Okay, so I'll make some changes in my HTML page. So you can see that I've changed the API URL and I've changed the method to post as well. Okay, so now when we'll trigger this HTML page internally, this API will be hit. Okay, so let me go to the browser and first let me just log in again, the curious coder 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, there's some issue, maybe. Yeah, I will have to run my application again. 1 second. All right, now let me just close all these tabs. Okay, I'll simply hit this API localhost /hi and I will have to log in 1 2 3 4 5. All right, now I'm simply logged in into my application. Okay, so if we just open this winiphone2.html and this time I try to claim the gift, it will give me an error. Okay, this application has no explicit mapping for error. Okay, it's a generic error, but actually it didn't allow me to access the API. Why? Because by default Spring Security make sure that our APIs, our post APIs are CSRF protected. Okay, they make sure that our APIs are CSRF protected. And how did they? I'll actually show this again as well. I'll go to the inspect element this time. Alright, let me just run this again. This time we'll inspect, and in the networks tab you will see that there is a call was made to this debit API, but it says 403 forbidden. Okay, why and how? Actually, how did they make it safe? Again, in the cookie we were passing the session ID, but again, how is it safe? Because for a post API, and not just for post, for any state changing API, post, put, delete, okay, for all of these APIs we need a session ID, but we also need something called a CSRF token. All right, that is the logic. That is the logic behind the protection. And now I'll tell you how CSRF token works and how it actually protects your APIs. So what exactly is a CSRF token? Basically, it is a token. It is some unique value that has to be sent in the request headers in addition to the session ID in all the APIs which are post, put and delete. All right. So unlike session ID, this token is not stored in the browser, is not stored in the cookies. Okay, and it is not automatically sent by the browsers in every API request. All right. That is why the evil site cannot access it, because it is not stored in the cookie and it is not automatically sent. Okay. So how are they stored? How are they used? They can be, there are multiple ways. One way is that the server itself can expose an API from which you can fetch the CSRF token whenever you need it. Okay, basically whenever you need means whenever you want to make a post API call, and before that it can be fetched through an API. Okay. Other way is that it could be rendered in some HTML form. Okay, so again, before hitting the post API, that HTML form could be rendered, it could be reloaded, and the client will get the CSRF token, or maybe in some JavaScript code. Okay, so there are multiple ways of doing this. One by one, I'll show you. Okay, so let me try to hit this API through a postman. Okay, so if I just hit on /debit, you will see that we get 401 unauthorized. Okay, so this is because first I have to add the credentials. So the credentials are the curious coder, and this will be 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, so first I'll have to add these credentials to login, but still it gives 401 unauthorized. Alright, why? Because for a post API, apart from the session ID, okay, you see that as I logged in the cookie it is sending a session ID, but apart from it, I also need a CSRF token. Okay, so how can I get that? I will have to expose that API. So I'll just create an API, public CSRF token, get CSRF. Okay, here I will take the HTTP servlet request object, okay, the request, and I will just simply return request dot get attribute, and in the attribute it will be CSRF token dot class dot get name. Okay, like this. So this returns of type CSRF token, so I will have to typecast it. Here I will just typecast CSRF token. Alright, so this API, this method will return a CSRF token, and I will just map it to some URL, let's say /CSRF. Okay, rerun my application. Great. So now if I hit the API, still unauthorized because I don't have a CSRF token. I will add another request, localhost /CSRF. Okay, in the authorization, I will give a basic auth, the curious coder, and 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, and I will just simply hit this API. Okay, so you can see that we fetch the CSRF token. Okay, the header name will be XCSRF token, and this is the token value. Alright, and I want to show you one more thing. Like let's say this is a get API. So here I have not passed the CSRF token yet, but this one I can easily access because as I told you, there is no CSRF protection for the get APIs. Okay, now in the post API, I will have to add this header. Actually, I just did XCSRF token, but I will take this real token value. Okay, so in debit, this is some old value that I kept, that's why it was not working. So the real token is this one, and the header name will be XCSRF token. Okay, if I hit the API, alright, it says not found. Okay, this is because actually the API is /bank/debit. My mistake. Yeah, so it says money deducted. Alright, so I'll again just remove this. The URL was wrong. I'll show you again. Okay, it is 401 unauthorized. But if I add the CSRF token, I'm able to access this API. Okay, so the CSRF token is exposed via an API. Now, if I want to check this through a browser, what I can do is I'll just remove this for now. Okay, on browser, let me just log in again. Okay, I'll just simply hit this API, the curious coder 1 2 3 4 5, and I'm logged in. Okay, so instead of showing the debit API, I'll show you a different post API. Let's say I simply want to log out. Okay, I want to log out. I'm on this page, and as of now, I have not logged out. But when I'll hit on this button, it will actually trigger a post API /logout. Okay, that is a post API that it will trigger internally. Okay, so since it's a post API, so the browser definitely needs a CSRF token, right? So as I told you, there is one more way of getting a CSRF token. The server can render it inside a HTML form. So you can see that if I just inspect this page, in this HTML page, actually there is in the body, you will see that there is this form where we have this underscore CSRF, and this type is hidden, and we have this CSRF token. Okay, so this is also another way of sending the token to the client. So now you can keep a note of this CSRF token. It is something UCNI and ends with DKC. So when I will actually log out, I'll just preserve the logs. Okay, log. When I will actually log out in this API, no, this one, yeah, the post API. In the payload, you will see that we actually send this CSRF token. Okay, this token was sent in the payload, and this token, the client, how did they get it? They get it through a HTML page that we just saw. Okay, that we saw earlier. Alright, so the crux is that for any post, put or delete API, for any API basically that changes the state of the application, basically it makes some DB changes or any write operation that does, for that we need an additional check which is a CSRF token. Okay. Hello and welcome to my channel, The Curious Coder. This video is part of my ongoing Spring Security series. In the previous video, I explained form-based and session-based authentication in depth. In this video, I'll be talking about basic authentication and we'll learn how it is different from the authentication mechanisms we discussed earlier. Now the thing is that for an application which has some UI or some front end, it is okay to have a form-based authentication. Okay, we can have a login form and we can pass the credentials there and we can just log in and the user is authenticated. Okay, but it might be possible that your application is a totally backend application. Okay, you can just have these APIs and you don't want any UI, you don't want a login form. Okay, you just want a totally backend application. And I think a more suitable type of authentication for that would be basic authentication. Okay, not the form based authentication because it requires a login form. Now I understand that by default we have form based authentication, and if I want to implement basic authentication, I will have to give some configurations of my own. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just create a class named security config. Okay, security config. I'll annotate it with @configuration. Okay, this basically tells that we are going to create some beans inside this class, and I'll also give an annotation @enable web security. Okay, so this basically tells Spring Boot that we are going to give our own implementation. Okay, we are not using the default one, we'll be giving some of our own implementation. Okay, so now the bean that we need to enable basic authentication is this one. Okay, I've just copy pasted. So this is a bean that returns a security filter chain, and we have some HTTP security in the argument, and we are just using the basic authentication. Okay, so internally what it does is it configures a basic authentication filter, but I'll come to that later when we'll talk about the architecture. So I'll explain that in detail later on in the video. But for now, you should know that we need this bean to enable basic authentication. Okay, we need this piece of code. All right, so what I'll do is I'll just start my project. Okay, and if I go to the browser and hit my API, let's say localhost 8080/hi. Great. So you will see that there is no form based authentication. Okay, we didn't get any form. So we have overridden the form based authentication and now we are trying basic authentication. Okay, but the problem is that there was no authentication at all, right? I could just directly access the API. Instead, there should have been some authentication, right? So actually what happened was, if I go back to IntelliJ, in case of a basic authentication, it does not take any API by default. Okay, what I mean is that in a form-based authentication, what it was doing is that it considered all the APIs for that particular authentication. But here we will have to configure the API that we actually want to secure. Okay, so for now, I have not configured any of the API. So what I need to do is I will have to write it like this: dot authorize HTTP requests. And here we will write something like this. We'll use a lambda function auth. For every auth, we have to take any request and we have to authenticate them all. Okay, so this line here represents that any of the request that we'll make on this server, on this application, all that requests have to pass through some basic authentication. Okay, now if I rerun and I go to the browser again, this time, great. So you will see that there is a sign in pop-up, and this is actually not a login form. Okay, the login form was a bit different. It had a proper UI. This is just some JavaScript code that is written. So this is a sign in pop-up, and here I will have to pass the credentials. Okay, so let's say the username is the curious coder and the password that I configured was 12345. Okay, great. So after passing the credentials, only then I am able to log in and I'm able to access my API. Okay, now since we don't need a UI, so from now on I'll not be calling the APIs using this browser. I'll actually move to Postman. Okay, so if we try to hit the API on Postman, you will see that we'll get 401 unauthorized. Okay, so this is because we have not passed the credentials. Therefore, I'm not able to access this API. Okay, now how to pass the credentials? On the browser, we got a login. Initially in the form-based authentication, we got a login form, and in basic authentication, we got a sign-in pop-up. But what to do here? We don't have any pop-up, we don't have any login form. So how will I pass my credentials? Okay, so the format is that you pass your credentials inside the headers. Okay, inside these headers, you pass your credentials, and the key will be authorization, and the value will be, you first write basic, and then after that you write username colon password. Okay, but the catch is that you don't give the username and password directly. Instead, you first have to encode them. Okay, so you do a base 64 encoding on those username and password, and then only you can pass them. So you see that just to access your API, the first thing that you need to do is you have to provide some credentials, and that too you have to provide in an encoded fashion. Okay, this is because when you are passing those credentials in this header, so we want to keep those credentials safe from when they are transmitted to the server from Postman. Okay, so even at that duration, we are keeping them safe. And that is why we are encoding them using base 64 encoding. Okay, now how to do all of this? Luckily, you don't have to take care about any of that. There is this authorization tab. You can just go into basic auth. Okay, and here you can pass your credentials. So I've already filled those, so that's why you can see it here. So I passed the curious coder and 12345, and you will actually see that the headers increased from 8 to 9. Okay, so automatically in the headers we got this authorization, and if I'll just show you this, you will see that there is basic, and this is the base 64 encoding of the username and password. Okay, so I can show you this as well. I'll just copy this, and if I try to decode it, we can just use this command. I'll echo, copy paste the text, and then I just base 64 and decode. Okay, great. So you will see that this is actually the curious coder 12345. Okay, so this is how this will be passed in the headers, and when this header will reach the server, there it will be decoded and we will get the actual credentials. Okay, so now I have added the basic authentication. This you select from here. Okay, basic auth, and here you pass on your credentials. Now if I hit the API, great, so I'm able to access my API. Okay, similarly if I try to hit this API 2, again it will be 401 unauthorized, because this is not like a session that once you hit one API then you can access all of them. So always you will have to provide your credentials. So in the basic auth, we'll provide these credentials. Great, I can access this as well. Similarly here in this API, initially I won't be able to access it, but in the authorization, if I just add my credentials, great, so again I'm able to access the API. Okay, so the key thing that you need to learn is that we pass this basic authentication as a header, the key will be authorization, and the value will be basic followed by the base 64 encoding of your username and password. Okay, now let's say I want to exclude one of my API from this basic authentication. So how can I do that? For that, first I will have to match the request. Okay, so I have a method request matchers. Here I will pass that API. Let's say I want the request to be /hello, and I will permit this API. Okay, we have a method permit all. Alright, like this. So basically I'm saying that for this request, for this slash hello, I'm giving it the permission. But if it is any other request, okay, dot any request like this, all right, then we have to authenticate those requests. Okay, that is what I have configured. So I'll just rerun. All right. So in the Postman, you see that for this API slash hi, if I hit send, it will be accessed because we have given the credentials. But let's say there is no authorization, so I won't be able to access. Similarly, hey also, I won't be able to access. But in hello, in this API slash hello, if I give no authorization, still I can access this API. Okay, because I have removed this API from this basic authentication. Okay, I have just excluded this one. All right. Now there is one issue with this security. What we have done here is that we have configured the username and password in the application.properties. Okay, we have just kept them hard coded over here, but this is not actually safe. Okay, we can definitely increase the level of security. So what I'm going to do is, instead of keeping these credentials here, we'll be keeping them somewhere safe in some external database. Okay, so let's see how we can do that. First, we have to make a connection with our database. So in the POM file, I'll have to add a couple of dependencies. Okay, we'll add Spring Boot Starter Data JPA and MySQL Connector J. So these are a couple of dependencies that we need to interact with the database. And in the application.properties, I will have to add these properties. Okay, these are all the database related credentials and the URLs and the driver class name and all the database related properties. Okay, so I have created a separate video about how we can make a connection with database. It's actually very simple. You just have to download a MySQL server and you have to configure all these properties, and we just have to add the dependency. Okay, so the crux is this much only, but if you want to see this in detail, you can refer to that video. Okay, so I've configured the username and password as root and 1234. So don't get confused with these credentials. These are actually the credentials for the database, but for our Spring security, we have already configured these one. Okay, but now I'm going to remove them from here. Okay, we don't need them here. And we have just made a connection with the database. Okay, so I will just rerun my project. Okay, so you can see that there are some logs related to database. Okay, these are some database related logs. So this means that a connection has been made. Now in the MySQL workbench, you can see that this is the server that I have downloaded. So you will see that the username is root and this is localhost 3306. And if I enter the password 1234, I am able to connect to the database. Okay, so this is the server that we have actually made connection with from our application. Okay, so I already have created a table users as of now. Okay, I have to use this database, and you will see as of now there is no entry in this users table. Okay, so it has these fields ID, username, password, and is active. Okay, so what we need to do is we have to create a user entity against this table. So I'll just create a class user entity. I'll annotate it with @entity and @table. Here we'll just pass name is equal to users. Okay, we'll map it with our table. We have a private long ID and a private string username. Okay, similarly we also have a password and we have a boolean variable that says is active. Okay, this is just to check whether the user that we are making is active or not. Okay, we can just enable disable using this flag. All right, so this will be our primary key @id. I'll just give @generated value generation type dot identity. Okay, so strategy, yeah, we have to keep So we have to give a strategy to generate our ID. I hope you guys know all these things: entity, repository, database. Okay, these are some of the basics that you need as a prerequisite for this video. Okay, then we just map this with some user with the actual DB column names. Okay, @ column name is equal to password. Similarly, here the column will be the actual DB column names for, I think, is underscore active. Okay, I'll just cross check. Yes, this is underscore active. Alright, so I have created my user entity. This is a mapping class with the actual user table. Okay, similarly, I'll also create a repository class, user repository, which extends JPA repository. Okay, this actually should be an interface, not a class. And here I just give my user entity and the data type of the primary key, okay, which is long. Right, you can see that we have a long ID. Okay, so here I will add a method find by username and is active. Okay, so we are just finding using a username and the user should be active. Let's say string username, and this will just return an optional of user entity. Okay, so we have declared this method. Basically, this is a query that says select star from user and select star from users, where username is equal to this username and is active is equal to true. Okay, something like that. It will be and. Yeah. So I have created a user entity and a user repository. Similarly, I can also create another class which will be a service class for this. Okay, let's call it user service. Okay, I can annotate it with @service, and here I can just add a method. Let's say public user entity get user from username. Okay, something like that. Username. Here we will pass the user that we will get from the headers basically. Okay, and using this we will fetch from our repository. So I will just take a repository, user repository. Okay, like this. I will auto-var it. Okay, and also here I will add annotation @repository. And let me do one more thing. I'll also add some getter setters here. Okay, so let's generate getter and setter for all the fields. And I will also generate constructors. Okay, so we'll generate a constructor for all the field and a no argument constructor as well. Okay, we can do all this thing using Lombok as well, straight away with the annotations. All right. Okay, so in the user service, I have created a method get user from username. So I will just call this user repository dot find by username and is active. Here I will pass the username and this will be true. All right, so this will actually return me an optional user entity. So I'm saying that if I get a value, then it's fine. If there is no such entry against our username, that means we didn't find a user. Okay, so I will throw an exception in that case. This will be new username not found exception. Okay, we already have this class defined, username not found. All right, so here I can say user not found. All right. Okay, so we just return this from this method. Okay, so basically we are querying using this username. We will find a DB entry, and if we have this DB entry, that means we have a user in the DB. And then what we can do is we can match the password. Okay, so the most naive approach would be that in every API we call this method and we just fetch the user and we match the password, right? But if we are doing it manually, if I'm calling this method from every API, then what is the point of having Spring Security? Because like this is a very basic thing. Now this we could have done at any point of time. We can just create a database, we can fetch values from there, and we can just retrieve it in every API and we can match the password. But what has Spring Security to do with it? Okay, so somehow we need to integrate this thing with Spring Security so that we don't have to manually call this method again and again in every API, right? So luckily for that, Spring Security already provides us another service class. Okay, we just have to implement it. All right, so we'll say implements user detail service. Okay, if I go inside this user detail service, you will see that this is part of Spring Security. Okay, and we have to implement a method which is this one, load user by username. Right, we have this method. So basically this is expecting an object of user details. Okay, so this is another interface inside this Spring Security, and we need to pass all the user information to this user details. Okay, this is how we will be integrating our database with the Spring Security. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just call this method get users from username. Okay, this will return me an entity object, basically user entity. Okay, let's just call it user, and I can just simply return user details object like this, user dot builder dot build, and in this user details, basically this is of the type user details. Okay, user details, I can just simply pass the credentials. Okay, so how will I get the credentials? I will get using this user that I fetched from the database. All right, so user dot username with username, this will be user dot get username. Okay, so we are fetching from the user entity and we are passing in this user details object. Similarly, dot with dot password. Okay, and dot builder. Yeah, that's why I'm getting this error. Okay, so in the password I will give user dot get password. Okay, like this. Okay, I think this is actually username. Do we have a username? Users dot. Okay, my bad. First I need to do user dot builder, and here I will do dot username, user dot get username. Similarly, dot password, user dot get password. Okay, then we have one more thing. We have this authorities. Okay, these are basically the roles that we will configure later in our videos. Okay, in some future videos I'll tell you about the roles and authorities as well. For now I'm just keeping it an empty list. Okay, collections dot empty list. All right, that's it. So we fetched the user from our database, and from the database we are passing the values in this user details object, and we are returning it in this method. Okay, which is actually a method inside this user detail service. Okay, this interface. All right, now we have to do one more thing for this user service. I'll just go in the security config and I will have to create a bean. Okay, so we have user detail service, okay, let's call it like this, and I will just return new user service. Okay, so this will be the service class that we created. All right, and I'll just annotate it with @bean. Okay, that's it. Now if I go back to the architecture that I just discussed in the earlier video, so the thing is that there are three types of classes that come into play. There are filters, there are authentication manager, and there is providers. Okay, so I have already told you about all this in my last video, but I'll quickly give you a brief over here as well. So the filters are the classes where the request actually lands. Okay, so authentication starts from here. For a form-based authentication, we had this filter named username and password authentication filter. Similarly, for basic authentication, we have a different filter named basic authentication filter. Okay, so the request lands here, and as I told you earlier, all the core logic of authentication takes place inside the provider classes. Okay, and authentication manager is kind of like a bridge between the filters and the providers. Okay, that is the crux. So I'll actually show you all these classes again as well in this video in the end. But as of now, you should know that for basic authentication, the filter is different. It is basic authentication filter, and all the core logic of authentication takes place in the providers. So for form based authentication, the provider was DAO authentication provider. Similarly, for basic authentication as well, the provider is DAO authentication provider. Okay, so the crux is that all the core logic is in DAO authentication provider. By core logic, I mean the place where actually user is fetched from the user details, okay, and the password is matched. So that password matching and the fetching of retrieving of user, that takes place in the DAO provider. Okay, so I'm telling you all this because we are giving some implementation of our own. Okay, we are making a few changes, so we will have to configure this DAO provider as well. Okay, so one more thing we'll add here. This will be public. I'll return authentication manager. Let's say authentication manager. Yeah, here we can add user detail service, and I will just create a DAO authentication provider object like this, and in the parenthesis I will have to give this user detail service. Okay, so somehow I need to tell Spring Security that in the provider we are going to be using this user detail service, and this user detail service further implements this user service that we have created. Okay, this is how all these things will connect. Okay, so here I will just pass user detail service. Okay, and then here I can just simply return new provider manager, and in the provider manager I will pass this DAO authentication provider. Okay, and we will declare it as a bean. Okay, simple. So this is the whole configuration. I'll quickly give you a brief. First, what we did was we created a user entity. Okay, we have made a table inside the database, and this is the entity class for that. Then we have a repository to write the query. Okay, and we have created our service class. In the service class, we are fetching from database using the username. Okay, we are fetching the active username, and this service class will implement the user detail service, which is actually a Spring Security interface. And in this method, we will have to give the implementation. Okay, so from the database user, we are giving the username and password to this user details. Okay, then after that, in the security config, we registered we registered two more beans, this user detail service, which will return our service, and the authentication manager bean that will actually, basically we are configuring the DAO authentication provider here. Okay, so this is all the configuration that we need to do. Now if I rerun my project, okay, the application is up. If I go to Postman and I try to hit this API /hi, so without any authentication, obviously it will be unauthorized. I will have to add a basic auth, the curious coder, and 12345. So now we don't have this username and password in the application.properties. We need this password in the database. Okay, so if I hit it, okay, so you will see that it is still unauthorized. Why? Because we have removed it from the application.properties, but we have actually not added it here in the MySQL workbench. Okay, you will see that my database is empty. So first I will have to configure the database. So I have this query. I will just add the curious coder and 12345, and if I hit select star from users, you will see we have this entry. Okay, now if I hit my API /hi, still it will give 401 unauthorized. Now why? So you will observe that here in the logs we are getting one error that says, given that there is no default password encoder configured, each password must have a password encoding prefix. Okay, so it is talking about a missing password encoder. Alright, so now what is password encoder? From the architecture you can understand that behind the scene some encoding of password also takes place. Basically, they do not want us to save the password like this, like a string value openly 12345. They want us to encode this password and save in the database. And Spring Security will automatically decode and encode all these things, so that they want us to enable. Okay. Now, how can I enable password encoder? It's very simple. I just have to create one more bean, public password encoder. Okay, we have this interface, password encoder, and I'll just return new bcrypt password encoder. Okay, I'll be using this implementation. Alright, so this is a class in the Spring Security Framework. I just have to create a bean of it. Okay, @bean. That's it. Now, instead of creating the user like this by directly inserting it, so I cannot do this. I have to delete this entry from here because I want to keep it encoded. Okay, so I'll just delete limit. Okay, all right, so my database is empty for now. Now if I want to add a username and a password in my DB, that will do using our application only. Okay, so I will create another API. Let's say I create a user controller @REST controller, and I'll simply just use the user repository to populate the user. Okay, we'll just create an API @AutoBat. Okay, public void save user, let's say with encoded password. Okay, and here I will just take two request params. One will be the username, string username, and the second one will be string password. Okay, so we'll take them as an input in the API. Alright, let me map it with some API. Let's say I'm just keeping it simple, /encode password. Okay, let's keep it @request mapping /user. Alright, so here I will create an object of user entity. User is equal to new user entity. User.set username will be the username that we get from input, and user.set password will be the password. Okay, like this. Simply user repository dot save. So we'll save this user. Okay, now where is the encoding taking place? It's not right now, so I will have to use this bean password encoder. Okay, you remember we have already created this bean, so I can directly auto-wire it. Okay, this password encoder, this one. Okay, yeah, so using this password encoder, I can just call a method password encoder dot encode. We have this method and we'll save the encoded password. Okay, so if we encode, it returns a string value, the encoded value. Okay, that's it. We can also make it active, user.set active as true. Okay, great. So we have created this API, and using this API, we will actually populate our database. Okay, so as of now, what I'll do is I'll just exclude this API from any authentication. Okay, ideally we should not do that, because the role of this API is that it's actually creating users that are able to access other APIs. So this one should be very authenticated, but we'll do that in some future videos when we'll talk about roles and responsibilities. As of now, I'll just keep it excluded so that we understand the basic authentication. Okay, so in the config, as I excluded this one, I'll also match dot request matchers. Okay, dot request. Oh, let's hello dot all. I guess we have to add it here. Dot request matchers, yeah. /users /*. Okay, as of now, any API that we create in this user controller, I'll exclude all of them from the security config. Okay, dot permit all. Okay, so we have excluded this one. Alright, so in the user controller, we have this API. Now, if I rerun my project, okay, so the project is up. Now, the API /user /encode password. Okay, so here I will create one more API, new request. Okay, let's say localhost /user /encode password. Okay, let me just cross check. /encode password user /encode password. All right. Okay, so in the parameters we'll pass username, let's say the curious coder, and password will be 1 2 3 4 5. Okay, /user /encode password, and this will be my username and the password. If I hit this, okay, it still says unauthorized. All right, so /user here we have, okay, it's /users, my mistake. I'll rerun my project. All right, now if I hit this, great, it returns 200. Okay, and in the database, if I check, great, so you can see that we have a username, the curious coder, and we have a password in the encoded format. All right, now if I try to hit this API, we are still getting 401 unauthorized. Okay, why? So I think we have missed one thing, that in this bean now, in the authentication provider where we are setting this authentication provider, we actually have to configure the password encoder as well. Okay, so in the set password encoder, I will just add a password encoder. Okay, so like we took user detail service, similarly I'll also take a password encoder reference as well, like this, and we'll be passing it here. Okay, I guess now it should work. All right, so my application is up. I'll try this again, /hi. Great, now I am able to access my API. Okay, so giving a quick recap, what we did, we actually created a user entity. We are fetching this user from the database, and in the security config, we have declared a bean for password encoder. We have declared a bean for authentication manager, where we are actually configuring the DAO authentication provider. We are passing the user detail service and the password encoder. Here, user detail service is a service class that we already have for which is already provided by Spring Security, and this user service is our class which is implementing this. And here we are fetching the user from database, and we are loading the same user in this user details. All right, for populating the database, I have created a separate API /user /encode password, where we are using this password encoder to encode the password. Okay, so this is how we can implement basic authentication. And as of now we have configured one user, but we can actually configure multiple users. Okay, so let's say I say the curious coder 2, and the password is something 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, like this. So now in our database, if you see, there will be one more user. Okay, if I come to Postman, and let's say I try to hit this API /a without any authorization, I will get 401 unauthorized. But if I use a basic auth, and here I will use the curious coder 2, and this will be 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, now if I hit the API, still I am able to access this API. Okay, so this is how basic authentication works. Now let me quickly show you some of the classes that we discussed in the architecture, the classes that actually come into play when we are doing all this authentication. So first I told you about that when we create this bean, internally we are configuring the basic authentication filter. Okay, so let's look into that. We have this basic authentication filter, and in this we have this method toFilterInternal. Okay, so this is where the request lands. All right, we have the username and the password, and the request lands here. Okay, so we'll not go line by line, because obviously we don't need to learn all this, but we just have to understand all the important classes that are into play here. Okay, so that I'll show you. So when we get a request, it is asking for an authentication manager. Okay, so here we'll call the authentication manager, which is basically the bridge between the filters and the providers. So here we have this implementation provider manager. Okay, this has a list of all the providers, and it is looping on this list. So it calls this supports method to check which provider is suitable for us. So in the case of a basic authentication filter, the provider that is suitable is DAO authentication provider. Okay, so we'll go to the implementation of DAO authentication provider. If I go inside this, you will not see it here directly because this is the parent class of DAO authentication provider, this abstract user details authentication provider. So actually the code goes here. And as I said, here we retrieve the user. Okay, so we are fetching the user from the input username. Okay, so if I go inside this, you will see that the actual implementation of this retrieve user is in DAO authentication provider. Okay, and this abstract user details authentication provider is the parent class of this DAO authentication provider. So this is where we have the whole logic. And here you can see that it is calling the user details service dot load user by username. Okay, and if you remember carefully, this is the method to which we have given our own implementation. Okay, so this is how all this is connected. We retrieve the user. Basically, we have given our own implementation. So the user details that we got here is actually the one that is stored in the database. Okay, now if I go 2-3 steps back where this retrieve user was called. Okay, so this was called here, this retrieve user in this abstract user details. And after this, we will call this additional authentication checks. And the implementation of this is again in DAO authentication provider. Here you can see that we have this password encoder. Okay, so here the password encoder comes into play. It is actually matching the input password and the password that we got from the user details object, which we got from the database. Okay, so this is the core logic that is happening behind the scene. Hello and welcome to my channel, The Curious Coder. In this video, we are going to understand JWT, aka JSON Web Token. First of all, let's step back and ask a very basic question. When we are talking about Spring security, what exactly do we need? We need to secure our APIs. We don't want anyone on the internet to randomly call our APIs and access our data. So for that, we need some way to identify who the user is and whether they are allowed to access an API or not. So the simplest way of doing this is using basic authentication. Here's how it works. The client sends a username and a password with every API request. On the server side, we can keep these credentials in the database. So every time the client calls an API, client sends the credentials and server validates credentials from the database. Simple. But the problem is that the client has to send those credentials in every single API call. And the server has to make a DB call every single time for every API request. Right? And that's neither efficient nor scalable. So the second approach is session-based authentication. Now let's understand this clearly. User logs in once using username and password. At this time, credentials are validated and DB calls happens only once. But after that, server creates a session and sends a session ID back to the client. So from now on, the client sends only this session ID with every API request. So now no need to send the credentials again and again, and no need to validate those credentials again and again. Sounds better, right? Yes, it's better, but there is still a problem. A session ID is just a random identifier. It does not contain user information inside it. Basically, using the session ID, the server has to look up the session details. And what details are we talking about? Details like the username, its roles. Roles is basically whether the user is an admin or a normal user or some privileged user. And apart from that, what permissions do these roles have, or the session expiry time. So things like these. Now all of this data is stored somewhere on the server, right? Maybe in the memory or in some Redis or in the database. But no matter where it is stored, the server still has to look it up. So this means that the server is maintaining state. That is, the server has to remember the user by keeping the session information with it. And that is the key point. This is where JWT comes into the picture. JWT says, why should the server remember anything at all? Okay, instead, let's just create a token and let that token contain everything inside it. Basically, inside a JWT, we can put username, roles, permissions, expiry time, everything. So now the token itself becomes the source of truth. There is no session lookup, no server memory, no Redis lookup, or no database lookup. So JWT is designed in such a way that the server just verifies the signature of the token and trusts the data inside it. And that is why JWT is considered as stateless, as server does not have to maintain any session. Alright, so to reinstate, you can think it like this, that session ID is just a pointer, but JWT is the data itself. Okay, so now let's look at how it is designed. So now what I'll do is, I'll visit this site jwt.io. Here we have a JWT token. We have an example for a JWT token, and I'll be using this example to help you understand how JWT is actually designed. Alright, so this is a JWT token. Okay, if you look carefully, it has three parts. This is the first part, then a dot, then this is the second part, and this is the third part separated by a dot. Alright, so every JWT token has three parts. First part represents the header, second part is the payload, and third part is the JWT signature. Okay, so first let me explain the payload. Any data that you want to embed inside your token, that you add in the payload. Alright, so in this example you can see that we have added a subject. In the subject there is user ID, then in the name we have the username, then there is a field admin, which is a boolean field, whether it's an admin or not, and this is the issuing time of the token. Okay, so similarly we can add other fields as well, like the expiry time, and you can give your own names of these fields. Alright, so you must understand that any data that you want inside your token, you can add in the payload in a JSON format. Alright, that is why we call them JSON Web Tokens. Okay, so I'll show you one example. This was a auto-generated example on this site. If I remove this and add a JWT token of my own, you will see that corresponding to this JWT token, this was the payload. Okay, so the role, I took a field as role and kept the role as admin. Then I added some expiry time. I took the field name as user, and in the user I gave the username the curious coder. Okay, then there is issuing time as well. Alright, so this is how you can give any data here, and it will be encoded to this value. Okay, now the first part is the header. This is where you give the algorithm. Okay, first I'll come back to the previous example. Alright, so first part is the header. Here we give the algorithm. So this algorithm says signature or encryption algorithm. Alright, so now at this point many developers get confused. They are confused about the fact that what they think is this was the JSON payload and it has a corresponding encoded value as this value. Okay, so what they think is that the encoding logic, the encoding algorithm that was behind this is specified over here, but that is not true. Actually, the encoding which is done for the payload as well as for the header is not dependent on this algorithm. No, this algorithm only comes into play when we are creating the signature. Okay, this third part. But for the first two parts, for this payload and the header, the algorithm that is used is base64 URL encoding. Okay, so what happens is that the JSON is first converted into a string value, and that string is further base64 URL encoded, and eventually it becomes this. Okay, similarly this payload, this JSON payload was converted into a string, and that string was base64 URL encoded, and we got this value. Okay, but this algorithm which is present over here, this is used when we are trying to create the signature. Okay, basically the third part. Alright, so now comes the third part. Signature is that part of the token which is used to validate the token. Alright, so at the server level, what we are going to do is we'll only verify the signature. If the signature is valid, that means the token is valid. Okay, so how is the signature created? Basically, it is a combination of header plus payload signed using this secret key, and the algorithm behind that signature will be specified here in the header. I'll repeat. Basically, it takes the encoded value of the header, basically this value, plus dot, plus the encoded value of the payload, and then it signs it using the secret key which you mention here. And the algorithm that is used behind the signature is specified over here. Okay, this algorithm. So this algorithm comes into play whenever we want to create our signature. Alright, so I'll show you this as well. If I just change the algorithm, okay, I'll change it to, let's say, HS384. So you will observe that the first two things, the header and the payload, their value remains the same, but the signature value changed. Okay, I'll again change it. You can see, let's say, RS384. So again, the value of signature changed, but the header and the payload remains the same. Okay, so this algorithm comes into play when we are trying to create this signature. Okay, and what is the purpose of this signature? This signature is the one that is used for token validation. Alright, so basically if I give a summary, the payload is the part where we have all the data of the user and the data like the expiry time or the issuing time. So all the session data we have here. Okay, we don't actually create a session, but any data relevant to the user and to the session that is present over here. Then in the header, we give the algorithm which is used for signature creation, and signature is the part which is actually used for token validation. Okay, so this is how a JWT token is created. I'll change it back to HS256, and you can see that it is very lightweight, and this can be easily passed in any header. Okay, that is why it is widely used. But there are some disadvantages as well. Like if someone gets a hold of this secret key, then they can just create their own JWT token and they can access your APIs. So it comes with some disadvantages as well. But the advantage is that it is very lightweight and it contains all the user information embedded inside it. So there is no need to maintain any session. Hence, JWT token is stateless. Alright, now let's understand the JWT flow step by step. Step 1 is token generation. First, the client sends username and password to the server. The server validates these credentials from the database. If the credentials are correct, the server generates a JWT containing the user details, and we call these user details as claims. Okay, the other name is claims, and then this token is signed using a secret key. The token is then sent back to the client. Alright, step 2, client sends the JWT. From the next request onwards, the client does not send username and password. Instead, it sends the JWT token, usually in the authorization header. Okay. Step 3 is token validation. On the server side, we verify the JWT signature using the same secret key. If the signature is valid, the token is trusted and the claims are extracted from the payload. Alright. Step 4, access granted. Based on the extracted claims, the server authorizes the request and processes the API call. So no database call is required for authentication in every request. Alright, it's just that a DB call is made in the starting, and after that, all the authorization takes place using the JWT token. In this bean, there is this CSRF disable. Okay, so CSRF is another concept that I told in some other video. So there is a CSRF attack that can happen, but I have disabled this check. Okay, so in this video, I have kept it disabled. That is all you need to know. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually bypassing some of the APIs, okay, from all this authentication. So this /user/** has been given all the permissions, which means that it will not be part of the Spring security. Okay, basically this API is excluded from the authentication, from basic authentication. So which is this API /user/**? It is here in the user controller. You can see we have /user, and here we have this API that says save user with encoded password. So basically, initially when I wanted to register a user for this basic authentication, for that I had this API. Okay, so I'll quickly show you. If I run my project and I have this register user API, okay, /user/encode password. As of now, we have these two users registered. I'll just delete them. Okay, I'll show this process again. We have deleted it. Now there are no registered users. So if I try to access the API, okay, I will not be able to access because there is no registered user. Okay, so I will register the user, the curious coder, and password as 12345. Okay, now you will see that we have an entry here. All right, and now if I try to access my API using the basic authentication, I give the username as the curious coder and password as 12345. I am able to access the API. So now I have given you a recap of basic authentication. Now let's see how we can implement JWT. Okay. So the first thing that I want you to know is that JWT is not a part of this Spring Boot starter security. No, JWT is not embedded inside this dependency. So we actually have to add 3 different dependencies to integrate JWT in our Spring Boot application. This JJWT API, JJWT IMPL, and JJWT Jackson. Okay, so first I'll add these 3 dependencies, and since this JWT is not a part of Spring Security, so I will have to create my own JWT service class. Okay, and I will have to write all the logic on my own. The logic to generate the token and to validate the token. Okay, so the process is mainly divided into these 2 parts. For in the first API call, we'll generate the token, and then in the corresponding API calls, we'll have to validate that token. Okay, so first let me write the code to generate the token. What I'll do is we'll just give it @service. I can add a simple method that says public string generate token. Okay, we'll just use the username to generate this token. All right, so what we can do is we can directly use the libraries that we have just added. So there is jwts.builder. One by one we'll add things into this JWT token. Okay, so first thing that I will add is a subject. Okay, so as there was in that example that we can add the username inside a subject, so I can just add the username here. Okay, then I can add some issuing time. Let's say set issued at. Okay, we have this method, and I can just give the current time, new date. Similarly, I can also set some expiration. Okay, let's say it is new date, and let's say I want to set it for 1 hour. So what I'll do is I'll take the current time and add 1 hour inside it. Okay, so I will just multiply 1000 into 60 into 30. Okay, like this. So I have set the expiration time. Similarly, I can add some claims inside it. Okay, so for that we have this method add claims. As of now, I'm not adding anything, but I could have added some roles and some other user information, maybe the user ID or something else. Okay, but as of now, I'm just keeping it empty. Okay, simple hash map. All right. Then in the end, I have to sign this JWT. So for that, we have a method .sign with, and here in the first argument, we will pass the key, and in the second argument, we will have to pass the algorithm by which we will sign it. Okay, so how can I get a key? I'll just take a simple variable public static final string secret. Okay, something like this, and I can just copy paste this secret. Okay, so you can keep any secret key. Okay, it's a string value, and actually I will have to convert it into a key. Okay, so we can just create a method. We actually have this class key. Okay, and here I have to pass an object of key. So I will use this, import this class. Okay, get signed key, let's say something like this. And what it will do, we can use this inbuilt method return keys dot like this and here I can just pass the secret.getBytes. Alright, so this method will return a key from this secret value, okay, from this string secret. Alright, so here I can just call this getSignedKey, and I can just pass the signature algorithm dot, let's say, ES256. Okay, but actually I don't want this one. I can just use HS256. Alright, then in the end we just have to write dot compact. Alright, that's it. Simple. I will just return it. Okay, so this is a very simple method that we have created to generate the JWT token. I'll just repeat what we have done. We have set a subject where we pass the username. We have an issuing time. We have some expiry time. In the claims, we have not added anything yet. And then we have just signed it using this key, which has this secret value. And we converted it into a key object, which we passed here. And the algorithm that we have used is passed here. Okay, simple. Now let me just create a controller. Basically, let me just create an API which will call this method. So in the user controller itself, I can just simply say public void authenticate, let's say, and here I'll just map it to some API, post mapping / authenticate. Okay, so this API has to be hit to generate the token, to generate the JWT token, and after that in the corresponding API calls we'll just keep on passing that token. Okay, so the first time we need the credentials. So for that I will just create a Pojo class, let's say auth request. Okay, it can have two fields, private string username and private string password. Alright, I'll just generate some getter and setters. Generate getter and setter. You can also use Lombok. I'm actually facing some issues with Lombok in my IntelliJ. That's why I'm not using it, but you can use it. I'll just generate a constructor and one more constructor without any arguments. Okay, generate constructor, select none. Alright, so I have this auth request. In the user controller, here I can just take it as a request body, auth request, @request body. Okay, request body. Yeah. So we are taking these credentials in the input, and what exactly were the steps? First, we need to authenticate these credentials. If it is a valid user, then only we'll generate the token. Okay, so how can we do that? For that, I will use something called Authentication Manager, which I created here, okay, in the security config. So in the user controller, I will just auto-wire it, private authentication manager like this, @auto-wired, and using this I can just call the authenticate method. Okay, here we pass a username password authentication token, and inside this I will just pass the username and the password. Okay, simple. So this method is called to authenticate the credentials. So automatically internally the credentials will be fetched from the database and then they will be validated. All these things will be done automatically because we have already integrated this user service which fetches from the database with this Spring Security. Okay, so all this I have told in my earlier video where I told about the basic authentication. Okay, so you just have to call this authenticate method, and that's it. Let me just simplify it a little bit. Okay, and just press enter here. Yeah. Alright, so this will return a variable of authentication. So I'm saying that if authenticate dot is authenticated, this means that these credentials are valid. In this case, we will generate a token. Okay, so how will I generate a token? I'll auto-wire the JWT service like this, And using this JWT service, I will call the generate token method. Okay, and here we can pass the username, auth request dot get username. All right, that's it. If it is not, then we can just, we don't need to do anything, or we could have thrown some exception, that is fine, but let it be like this. Okay, so I'll just recap. Here we are authenticating the credentials. If they match the credentials inside the database, then only, if they match, then only we'll generate the token. When we are generating the token, we are actually using this library that we got from the dependency that we added. Okay, we have set the subject, we have set the issuing time, the expiration, the claims, and we have signed the token. Okay, so my bad, yeah. Let me rerun the project. Great. So the project is up. If I go to the Postman and I just simply create another request, let's say /user/generate token. Okay, sorry, my bad, yeah. /generate token. In the body, I will have to pass the username as the curious coder and the password as 12345. All right, and I don't have to use any authorization here. Why? Because all the APIs inside this user controller, I have excluded from the security config. I've already excluded it. So when I'm actually hitting this API, which generates the token, at that time, I don't need any authorization. Okay. So when I hit my API, my bad, the URL is /authenticate. Okay, this is the URL. All right, I will just hit it, and great, we got a 200. Okay. All right, and there was a mistake here. I actually have to return this token. I will just return, and if it is not, I will return null. Okay, like this. Rerun my project. Great. So I have returned the token that was generated. Now if I'll hit this API, great. So you can see that we get this token. Okay, it is a JWT token which has 3 parts. This is the header, then a dot, then this is the payload, then a dot again, and here we have the signature. Okay, now if I try to access my API, let's say this is the API /hi, and here I have only given the basic authentication, and if I try to access it, you will see that I am able to access this API. Why? Because so far I have only written the logic to generate the token, but I have not written any logic where I am saying that in every API call, we will have to validate that token. Okay, so that validation part I have not done yet, and I have not integrated that with Spring Security. So our project is still relying on this basic authentication, because here in the security config, we have given this basic authentication. Okay, so somehow I need to integrate the JWT authentication with the Spring Security. So now I'll add the logic to validate our token. So for validation, what we need is, we need to verify the signature, and we need to check whether the token is expired or not. Okay, that's it. So I'll just simply write one method, public void verify signature. Okay, and I'll not just only verify the signature. If the signature is valid, then I'll also extract the details from the token. I'll extract the data. So I'll just write and extract claims. Okay, something like this. All right. So if I have the token inside this string token, I just have to verify the signature, and I have to extract the claims. All right. So how can I do that? Again, we'll use JWTs, and I will just parse. Okay, parse builder dot. First, we need the key. Okay, we have to set the signing key again, because then only we can, verify the signature. For the signature to be verified, we first need to pass on the key. Okay. So I'll just call this method get signed key. And after that, I'll just say build, and I'll just again parse and claim all the JWS. Okay. Here we will have to pass the token again. That's it. And then we can just get the body. Alright. So, okay, this will not be void. This will be of the type claims. Alright. So what we are doing is we are passing on the JWT token. And we are using the key again. Using this key, we are verifying the signature. And after that, we just parse on the claims and we extract the claims. Okay. So basically at this point, the signature has been verified and we have extracted all the data from the JWT token. And when I'm saying all the data, I mean that the subject and the expiration time and the issuing time, all those will come under claims only. Okay. When I say extract all claims, I'll write it like this, extract all the claims. So it means that yes, this claims as well as the subject, issued at, expiration, all these are considered claims only. Okay. So this object has all the information inside it. Alright. Now I can just simply write some methods to, let's say I want to extract the username or the expiration time. So I can have some helper methods for that. Okay, so let's say I want extract username. Okay, so we can just take the token as an input and we can just call this verify signature and extract claims token. This will give me all the claims and I will just have to call get subject. Alright, because I passed my username inside the subject. Okay. Similarly, I can create one more method. Let's say public date, get expiration. And again, I will just pass the token. And I will return verify signature token dot get expiration. Okay. Like this. So I have created two more methods, and let me just create a boolean method that validates whether it is expired or not. So it will be is token expired. What I'll do is I'll just simply take the string token. Okay. And I will just call get expiration, pass the token, and I will just say that it is before the current time. Okay. That means it has not been expired. Okay, simple as that. Alright. So this is it. We have created all the relevant methods. Now what I can do is I have these methods, but I have to call these methods from somewhere. Okay. So in the basic authentication, what happens is that when we added the Spring Security dependency, it gave us a chain of filters. Okay. And in every authentication, in every API call, the authentication takes place through that filters. So somehow I need to add a JWT filter, and I need to create a JWT filter, and I need to add that filter in the security filter chain. Okay. Somehow I need to do that, and it should be before the basic authentication. Okay. So for basic authentication, we know that in the filter chain, we use something called UsernamePasswordAuthenticationFilter that I've told in my previous videos. So that is what I'm going to do here. First thing is I will just remove this part. We don't need the basic authentication. Okay. And I have to say that add filter before, and here I will pass the JWT filter. First, let me just create a JWT filter. Alright. I'll just create a JWT filter, and this will implement, or not exactly implement, this extends once per request filter. I'll make it as @component. Then there is this method that has to be implemented, which is this do filter internal. Okay, so this filter I will pass here in the security config. I will just use private JWT filter, auto wire the same, and I will pass it here. Okay, so I'm saying add filter before username password authentication filter. Okay, dot class, like this. Yeah. So what I've done is I have removed the basic authentication and I'm saying that pass this JWT filter before this username password authentication filter. All right. And now we have to implement this JWT filter. Okay. So what are we going to do here? Here we are going to call these methods. Okay. The verify signature and the is token expired. All right. Somehow we'll write that logic. Okay. So if I go to the filter, now first we need to extract the token. So where do we get the token from? I'll just go to Postman. Whenever I want to pass a JWT token in my API, I choose JWT bearer or this bearer token. Okay. Here I can pass the token, like if I pass this in the API 3, here I can pass this. Okay. You can see it. So when I do it like this, in the headers, a header is added named authorization. And if I just show you this, it will be something like this. Bearer, we always have this string. This is the convention. Then there is a space and then we have the JWT token. Okay. This is the JWT token. So if I want to extract the token, I will have to write this logic only, that I will first fetch some auth header, which I'll fetch using the request. Okay, request dot get header. Here we will have authorization. Okay, and all I'm saying is if auth header is not equal to null and auth header dot starts with bearer. Okay, that means that we have the authentication, we have the JWT token. So what we can do is I can just take token here outside this if. Let me keep it as null. What will be the value of token? Token will be equal to auth header dot substring and I will keep it as 7. Why 7? Because it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and there is a space as well. So token will be whatever there is after that 7 strings. Alright, so we got the token. Now what we need to do? We need to check that whether this token is valid or not. Okay, so we need to verify the signature. I will just auto wire JWT service like this, @autowired, and using this JWT service, we can just call verify signature and extract all claims. Okay, like this. So this will just give me all the claims, extract claims, and the other thing that I need to do is I need to call this method is token expired. Okay, so I will just call JWT service dot is token expired and I'll pass my token. Alright, so if this is not expired, simple, if this is not expired, that means that the token is valid. Alright, so now we need to do one additional step, and this is something you should just remember. We need to pass this token, we need to set this token in the security context as well. Okay, so that is something that we need to do. So I will just show you the syntax for that. It is very simple. Security context, we have a security context holder dot get context, and we are saying if the get authentication is not equal to null. Okay, this is something that we have to do to integrate our JWT with the Spring security. Okay, so I'll write all this logic inside it. If it is not equal to null, so I'm saying that token is not expired, that means everything is successful. So I have to set this authentication. Okay, I have to set the token inside this authentication. Okay, so how I do that? I again write security context holder dot get security context, Okay, dot get context dot set authentication, and here I pass my token. But the thing is, you will see that it takes an argument. Basically, the argument here is of the type authentication. So I will have to create a username password authentication token. Username password authentication token is equal to new username password authentication token. Something like this. I have to create this object, and for this object, here I will have to pass my username. So where can I get the username? I can call the extract username method, but I have this claims here only, so I can just use this claims dot get subject. Okay, that's it. And here the second argument is, I'll show you all the arguments. Here we don't have any, we don't need to pass any credentials. I'll pass just null. And here we have to pass the authorities, basically the roles. So as of now I don't have any, so I'll just take a new array list. All right. So using my token, I have created I basically have created this object username password authentication token. This is something that we have to do to pass this to the Spring Security and to set the context. So here I will just pass this username password authentication token. Okay, that's it. So all this logic is done here. So after all this happens, I have to move ahead in the chain. So this will be filter chain dot do filter request and response. This is how we write any filter. Okay, we just give our logic and then we move ahead in the filter chain. Okay, and then there is one more line that I can actually add here. I'll just show you. Here we have this token username password token dot, we have to set some details. Okay, so this is something that you can just remember. Basically, if there are some other information with our token, that also we can set it by writing this. Okay, so we have to write new web authentication details, and not details, it will be detail source. And here in the source, we'll say dot build details and we'll pass the request. So if we have some other information in the request, that is also passed and saved in the security context. All right. So these are some of the things that are to be done in order to integrate the JWT with the Spring Security. Okay, so that's it. I'll just repeat. We have created a filter. We are fetching the token from this header authorization. After that, we have called dot substring because we have bearer first and then only we have the token. Then we are verifying the signature and extracting all claims. So this is the verify signature where we parse on the token, we use the key to verify the signature, and then we extract all the claims here. Okay. Now using this, then we have also checked that whether the token is expired or not. Okay, so for that we are just using get expiration and we are saying that whether it is before the current date or not. After that, here we have to pass on the token to the security context. So for that, we just took the username from claims object that we got here. And after that, the credentials are null and the authorities, basically the third argument, which is this authorities, this is also null because we don't have any roles here. Okay. After that, we pass some more details that are there in the request and we set our security context holder. All right. Then we move ahead in the chain. Okay, so that's it. And in the security config, we have disabled the HTTP basic auth and we are saying that add this JWT filter before the username password authentication filter. Okay, so now if I just rerun my project, so there is one change that I need to do here. Actually, it will not be not equal to null. It will be equal to null. Because if our security context is not set, then only we will set this security context. Okay. And we should do one more thing. We should add another check here, which says if token is not equal to null. Okay. So this means that we just bypass this thing. And in that case, if token is not equal to null, then only we'll do this thing. All right. So now if I just run it. Okay, so the project is up. What I'll do is I'll just again create a token. Okay, we got a different token, and this time if I hit this API, this /hi using the basic authentication, you will see that we get 403 forbidden. Okay, why? Because now we have added JWT filter in the filter chain, and this API is expecting a JWT token. Okay, because we have added the filter before the username password authentication filter. All right, so we have got this JWT. What I'll do is I'll just use this bearer token and I will pass this token here. Okay, so this means that in the headers we have an authorization and here we have this token. Okay, now if I hit it, great. Now you are able to access the API. Okay, so this is how you can integrate JWT in your Spring Boot application. However, there is one issue with this. There is a small issue and it's kind of a disadvantage that even if I delete my user, let's say I just delete the users and still now there is no user, and still if I try to access my API, you will be able to access the API because your token has not yet expired. Okay, the expiry time was 1 hour, so it's not expired yet, but your user has been deleted, but this token was issued. Okay, so now your whole application is dependent only on the token for authentication. Okay, it does not worry about the username. So that is a bit of a disadvantage when you are keeping it completely stateless. So for that reason, what we do is that using this token only, when we are extracting the claim, we also extract the username and we verify the username from the database. Okay, and if you look at the code for this JWT in some article or in some other tutorial, you will find that code only, that they are fetching username from the database and they are verifying the username. But that kinds of beats the stateless thing, because if we are making a DB call again and again, then what is the point of having JWT? Okay, but you have to sacrifice something. Either you can sacrifice that DB call or else you will face this issue that I just told you about. That if someone deletes your user, then also the JWT token is still valid until it is not expired. So one more solution would be that you can keep a very small expiry time. That is also one solution. But these are all the things that I want you to know. So this design that I've made here, it is completely stateless, but it has no solution in case the user gets deleted. However, the different solution is that we can keep a user, we can extract the user and we can match it from the database, but then it will not be stateless. All right. So I hope this video was helpful. I understand that this is a difficult topic. So my recommendation is that you should implement this on your own. You should do some hands-on and you can watch it multiple times. Then only you'll be able to grasp it properly. Okay. Hello and welcome to my channel, The Curious Coder. This video is part of my Spring Security series. And in this video, I'm going to discuss about how authorization takes place in Spring Security. Imagine you're building a hotel management application and it has multiple functionalities. You can add a room, you could view some room, or you could view all the rooms. Now let's say we have three types of users: admin, staff, and a guest user. The admin should be able to access all the functionalities, add rooms, view any room, and view all the rooms. The staff should only be able to view rooms, but should not be allowed to add a room. And the guest should have the most restricted access. They should only be able to view their own room. Now here's the important part. All these users are already logged in, which means they are authenticated. But even after authentication, they don't have the full access to everything. This is what authorization is. In Spring Security, we implement authorization using roles and permissions, deciding who can access what. So let's learn how to implement it. Now role is something that is associated with a user. A user could be some guest user or an admin or some staff member. So somehow I need to associate this role with the user. Okay, so let's start with that. what I'll do is I'll just add a string field named role. Okay, and we can map it to some column. Let's say name is equal to role. Alright, so I'm making the changes in the user entity. I have added another field role. Okay, and I've mapped it to this DB column. Alright, and let me just add it as a constructor parameter in this constructor, not in this one. This is a no argument constructor. I will add this role in the all argument constructor. Alright, similarly I can also create some getter and setter methods for it. Okay, so we have a get role and set role. Alright, so similarly in the database also I have these columns ID, username, password, and is active. So what I'll do is I'll simply just add another column using this alter table command. I will add this column role. Okay, and let me just delete the existing users. Alright, so now we have this users table. This is empty and we have added another column role here. Okay, now we have this class user service in which we are fetching the data from the database. Alright, also one more thing, this is some code that I have written already for JWT in my previous video, and my recommendation is that you must watch that video, then only come here and watch this, because it is kind of a continuation of it. We have already implemented the JWT part and it is very, very important. Okay, only after that you'll be able to understand how roles work. Okay, cool. So here in this user service, we fetch the user from the database, and this implements this user detail service, which is actually a Spring framework, a Spring security class. Okay, this is an interface that Spring Security provides us. So we have implemented this method load user by username, and in this method we fetch the user from the database, and using this user we build this user details object. Okay, so the crux is that we fetch the user from the database and we basically tell all the user information to Spring Security. Okay, somehow we have transferred that information from the database to Spring Security. Okay, so we have already transferred this username, password. We also have to give information about the roles. Okay, so the roles we set in this field authorities. Okay, so as we are talking about authorization, so roles are set in this authorities. Okay, so as of now we have it as an empty list. Instead of this, I will just use this object new simple granted authority, and here using this user I will just pass the role. Okay, simple. So at this point you can understand that now Spring Security has information about the user role. Okay, along with the username and password, we have also given the information about the role. Okay, now what? Now, as I told you that JWT is a token that consists all the user data inside it. Okay, so when we were creating the JWT token, here in the generate token, we have set the username, we set the signature, we set some expiry time. So at this point only, we should also set the information about the user role. Okay, so how can I do that? Here in the claims, we have set a new hash map. Instead of that, I will just create another hash map, string comma object. Let's call it claims only. Claims is equal to new hash map, and in this map I can put a key as role. Okay, like this, and against it I can add a role. So where can I get this role from? I'll take another argument here, string role, and I will just add it. Okay, and instead of the hash map, new hash map, I will just put claims over here. Okay, so at the time of token generation, I'm adding the role. All right, now where do I get this role? Okay, that is the important thing. So we call this method from the user controller, and at the time of authentication, after the user is authenticated, basically at the first time we make a DB call and we validate our credentials. So at that time, if it is a valid user, if it is authenticated, then we used to generate the token, right? So when we are doing this authentication, inside internally, we are actually making a DB call, and this authentication is actually a class from Spring Security only. Okay. So as I told you that here in the user service, we have already passed the role information, the authorities inside this user details object. So Spring Security already knows about the roles. Okay. So somehow I can fetch those roles from this authenticate object as well, from this authentication object. Okay. So let me show you how we can do that. We can simply use authenticate.getAuthorities. Okay. First I'll get all the authorities. Then I will iterate over them. As of now, we only have one authority only. Okay, dot next dot authority, again dot get authority. Okay, and here we'll get the roles. All right. Now one thing is that you should remember that whenever we are creating these roles, we should use a prefix role underscore. Okay, and that we use whenever we want to inform Spring Security about that role. Okay, so that is a prefix which is very important, and I'll show you where exactly it is used. So for now, we should know that this authority, this role has a prefix. Okay, but when I'm passing that role to the JWT token, at that time, I don't want the prefix. Okay, so I'll just show you. For now, I will replace that prefix role underscore. Okay, I'm going to add this at some place, you'll see. But as of now, I'll just replace it with some empty string. Okay. So when we'll fetch the role from this authority, we'll get a role along with this prefix. But now I want to pass this role in the token. So that is why I am removing this prefix. Okay, that is what you need to understand. Okay, so this will return me a string role. Okay, so this is how we can fetch a role from this authentication object. All right, which is basically an interface that is a part of Spring Security. Okay, and I will just simply pass this role. Great. Okay, so at the time of token generation, we have passed the role from the database that we got from the database. From the database, we passed it to Spring Security, and from this authentication object, we passed it in the generate token method. Okay, here we have put it in some map, and this map we have added in the claims. All right. Now, do we need to verify this? Do we need any part of roles at the time of token validation as well? So actually, yes, I will show you a place. Okay, so at this place, we created a JWT filter, if you remember, and we extracted these claims. So here we have to pass this to the security context holder. Okay, we pass this token, and you can see that we created this username password authentication token. And here we are passing the username, then credentials at null. And we had this third argument where we said that it will be a empty list. Okay, but actually it was the authorities only. Okay, so here as well, we need to pass the roles. So how will I get that? We have the claims. Using the claim, I can just simply get role. Okay, simple. And this will be of type string. Okay. That's it. If I extract a variable, this will be string role. Okay, so from the claims I got the role, and I need to pass this role over here. Okay, so this will actually not be a string value. Instead, I will need list.of new simple granted authority, and here I will pass the role. Okay, this will be a list. I'll extract. All right. And this simple granted authorities, I will pass over here. Okay, here in this token, which I actually set to the security context. All right, so all this I have told in my previous video. I hope you remember. Okay, great. So far what we have done, we have added a role in this user entity. We added a column in the database. Okay, after that, we added that when we were generating the token. Okay, so at this point in the user controller, when we were generating the token, we fetched it from the authentication object, and we passed it here in the generate token where we added it as claims. And also at the time of verification of that token, we are passing it to the security context in this username password authentication token object. Okay, and here we are fetching from the claims. Okay, simple. Now one thing I missed actually here as well, I will have to add the prefix. Okay, so from there I removed where I was supposed to add the role in the token. So in the token I removed it, I removed the prefix, but whenever I'm passing the role information to Spring Security, at that time I always add this prefix. Okay, so that is why I've added role plus this role, because this will get from the claims and claims we get from the token, and in the token we don't have that prefix. Okay, so once I'll actually hit the API, you'll get to understand about this prefix. For now, if you're not totally getting it, it's fine. Okay, I'll show you that. All right, cool. So now we have configured the roles at every place, but as of now, we have not set this that which role can access which API. Okay, that we have not configured. So let me just create some APIs. I'll just create a controller, room controller. Okay. @risk controller, this will be @request mapping /rooms. I'll create 3 APIs. Let's say the first one is add room. Okay, so this will be a simple post mapping, and I'll say okay, let it be /rooms only. All right, so I'll just simply return room added. Okay, then I have another API, public string get room by ID. Okay, so this one I can just, for this I can use a get mapping, and here I will pass ID as a path variable. Okay, @path variable, let's say long ID, and I will just simply return a string value that room fetched for ID. Okay, like this. And we can have a third API that fetches all the rooms. Okay, so get rooms, this will be the third API, and I will just map it with @get mapping. Okay, so this one is mapped with /rooms, and this post mapping is also mapped with /rooms, but this one is a post method and this one is a get method. Okay, so I will just simply return, let's say all rooms. Okay, so obviously in an actual hotel management application, there will be DB operations here, and these APIs will be performing some tasks instead of just returning some string values. But here, just for the clarity, I have written it like this. Okay, so now what I want to achieve is that if a user is admin, then I want them to access all these 3 APIs. If a user is just a staff member, then I want them to access these 2 APIs. Okay, the get all rooms and get room by ID. But that staff member won't be able to add a room. Okay, and if user is just a guest, then I don't want that user to get all the rooms, and I also don't want that user to add a room. That user can only access this API. Okay, this is what I want. So now how can I configure this? For that, I need to reach the security config. So actually you can see that here we have already configured something. We have used this request matchers to bypass this user API. Okay, all the APIs in this user controller, we have bypassed it from any kind of security because we have given them all the permissions. Okay, so we'll use a similar kind of thing. What I'll do is I'll just write request matchers. Let's say http method dot post, and the request is /rooms. Okay, so this is my request, this API. So for this API, what I want is I only want it to be accessed by the admin. Okay, so here I will write admin like this. So I told you about that prefix. This is where that prefix comes in handy. Okay, if we want this has role method to work perfectly, we have to create the role with that prefix role underscore, because then only this method will understand that okay, this admin has this admin is a role. Okay, so it only reads the part which is after that prefix. If I have not given that role underscore, then this method will fail. Okay, so that is kind of a convention. You should understand that Spring Security always considers a role with a prefix. So since we have added it as a prefix there, here we only have to add the name. Okay, so here I can write admin because it already considers it as a role because we have added that prefix. Okay, so this is how the convention is. Now I can configure other APIs as well. So this one is .get and this is /rooms. Alright, so now this API is this one. In the room controller, this get rooms. Okay, so this I want to be accessed by admin as well as the staff member. Alright, so here I used has a role. Here I will use has any role because we are configuring multiple roles. So admin can access this and user and the staff can also access it. Okay, so these are some of the roles that I am configuring. Similarly, we have the third API, which is http method.get. Okay, and this is, let's say, /rooms/*. All right, and this third API, this one, I want to be accessed by all the three roles. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll just simply add has any role. Here I'll say admin, then staff, and also the guest. Okay, so this third API /room/*, basically anything after the rooms that can be accessed by all the three roles. Okay, so now let me run my application. Okay, it started perfectly on 8080. What I'll do is, first I'm gonna register some user. Okay, so this username is let's say the username is Curious Coder and the password is 12345. Okay, we missed one thing, I guess, that when we are adding the user, okay, we are setting the user, we have to set the role as well. Okay, I've already done it, I didn't show you that, but here in this save user where we are going to generate the user, instead of username and password, as a request parameter, we should also take a role and we should set that role in the DB. Okay, when we are registering a user. Okay, so that is what I've done. So here I will just pass a role. Let the role be role underscore. Here we will have to give the prefix. Okay, so let the user be role underscore admin for now. Let it be the Curious Coder. Okay, and the password be 12345. If I hit my API, it works perfectly. In the database, if I check it, we have made the entry and the role is role underscore admin. Okay, cool. Now what I'll do is I'll generate a JWT token for this username and password. So I'll hit this authenticate API. Okay, we have this JWT token. All right, now let me just add the APIs of rooms. Okay, so we have this post API /rooms. So if I try to hit it, of course I won't be able to hit it. Why? Because I have not added the JWT token yet. Okay, so in the authorization, I will have to give this bearer token, and here I will just copy paste the token. Okay, I copied this token and I pasted it here. All right, let me just save this request. Let's say add room. All right, now if I hit this API, it works perfectly. Okay, it says room added. All right, now if I change this API, let's say get all the rooms, this will also work. And if I want to fetch a particular room with some ID, this one also works. Okay, why? Because the user that I created has the role as admin. Okay, now let me create another user, the Curious Coder 2, and this time let the role be simply staff. Okay, role underscore staff. Now if I hit it, great, it gives 200. Okay, if I check the user table, I have one more entry and the role is staff. Okay, now if I try to hit this API, okay, so if we hit this get API, okay, first I have to generate a token for this particular user. This is the Curious Coder 2. I will just generate a different token and copy it. Okay, and let me just paste it. Yeah, So if I try to access this API /room/1, I'm able to access it. If I try to fetch all the rooms, that also I'm able to access. But if I try to add a room, now it gives 403 forbidden. Okay, why? Because we have configured that this API, this post API /rooms can only be accessed by an admin, not by a staff member. But these other two APIs, the get API of rooms and get a room by ID, these can be accessed by staff as well. Alright. Similarly, let me create another user. Let this be the Curious Coder 3. And I'll just keep it as role_guest. Okay, I'm keeping the password same only for every user. Alright. So I made the third entry. If we check, we have this entry and the role is role_guest. Now, if I generate a token for this one, the Curious Coder 3, we get a different token. This I can copy. If I try to access this API, I'll just copy paste this. This is the post API to add a room. This will be 403 forbidden. If I want to fetch all the rooms, this is also 403 forbidden. But if I want to fetch only particular room, which might be assigned to me, okay, that I can access. Alright. So this is how I have configured different roles and I have given them access to different APIs. Okay. Now instead of has role, there is one more method that you might see in some implementations. What they do is they just write has authority. The only difference is that here you will have to give the prefix. You will have to write it like this. Similarly, here I will write has any authority. And again, you will have to give the prefix role_. Similarly, role_. Here as well, role_. So these are some conventions that you just have to learn. Okay, that's why I'm emphasizing a lot on it. Okay, because sometimes when you see the implementation, you might get confused. Okay, so here also I'll use has any authority. Alright, so either you can directly call the has role method or you can call has authority, but here you will have to use a prefix. Okay, so I'll just rerun. Alright, so we already have the users. I'll just simply generate a token again. Let's say I generate for the Curious Coder 3. Alright, I have this token. Now if I try to fetch this room, only a room by an ID, I'm able to access it. Okay, but if I try to fetch all the rooms, I cannot. Similarly, if I try to create a room, that also I can't do because the token that I've used is for the Curious Coder 3, whose role is role_guest. Alright, now one more thing that I wanted to show you. These are some of the APIs that I created earlier. Okay, so I'll show you in the controller as well. These are simply hello, hey and hi. And I have not configured anything in the security config about them. Okay, we don't have any request matchers for these APIs. So if I try to access them, let's say I will just copy paste the JWT token that I just got. And if I try to access them, I can easily access them. Okay, this one also, I'll show you this. You'll use bearer token and I can access hey world as well. Similarly, I can also access hello. Why? Because we don't have any role-based authentication on it. Okay, we have just simply used JWT in our project and I'm passing the JWT. That is why I'm able to access them. Now, before going any further in the video, let me tell you about a few classes and interfaces that actually work behind the scene. Okay, so in the interviews, sometimes they ask questions around these as well. So that's why I wanted to give you a glimpse. Okay, so when we were talking about authentication, there was an interface authentication manager that was working behind the scene, right? Similarly, for authorization, there is an interface authorization manager. Alright, so it is a functional interface and it has this method authorize that is to be implemented. So if you look carefully, this interface has a lot of implementations and one of the implementation is this one, request matcher delegating authorization manager. Okay, so when I am actually calling this request matchers, internally this interface, this class comes into picture. Okay, So this is one of the implementation which is used when we are giving our configuration using the request matchers. Alright. Similarly, there are a few more implementations. I'll discuss about these two as well, the pre-authorize and the post-authorize. Okay. So in this security config, we are configuring each API one by one. Okay. But in an actual application, there will be a lot of controllers and there will be a lot of APIs. So if I'm going to configure them like this in this security config, then it will be actually very tedious and this class will become a very large file. Okay. So that is why there is another way to configure our methods, and that is actually called method security. Alright, so what we can do is, instead of writing it like this, I will just comment this out. We can just go on the controller level, and on this method, I can use an annotation that says @pre-authorize. Okay, and here I can simply say has role, and I can just pass admin. Okay, simple. Similarly, here I will pass admin as well as staff as well as guest. I guess this API is allowed by every user, every role. Okay, guest. And in this one, I will just say admin and staff. Alright, so this is how I can configure my roles on the method level. Okay, and when we are using this annotation, at that point internally, this request matcher is not used. Instead, this authorization manager is used. Okay, so this is something that you can tell in an interview. Okay, so alright, now I was in this controller, in the room controller, and if I run my application, great. So the project started. I'll simply generate the token for the curious coder. So this one is the one that has the role as admin. Okay, so the curious coder has admin, coder 2 has staff, and coder 3 has guest. Alright, so if I copy paste this token and let's paste it here. Alright, so this is the ID one. I can, okay, it is giving forbidden. Why? Let me just check. This says has role. Okay, I have to write actually has any role here, and here as well has any role. Okay, and here we are giving a single role, so I'll write has role. Okay, I'll just rerun. Great, so I'll again generate the token. I'll just copy it and I can paste it here. Alright, great. So now I'm able to access the API. Similarly, I can also access the post API, and I can also access the fetch all rooms. Okay, because my user is an admin. Now I'll generate token for the curious coder 2. This one is staff member. Copy it, paste it here, and this time if I try to access the post API, it will give me forbidden, but I can access the get all API, and similarly I can also access this one. Okay, and similarly if I do it for the curious coder 3, I can just copy it, paste it in the token. Okay, so it can access this API but cannot access the post rooms as well as the get rooms. Alright, simple. So this is how it works. Now we have a pre-authorize. Similarly, we also have something called post-authorize. Okay, so what does post-authorize does? So actually what does pre-authorize does? Before hitting this method, this method gets called, this authentication takes place. Okay, because as the name suggests, it's pre-authorize. But in case of a post-authorize, the method gets hit, but even after that we can add some authorization. Okay, so even after the method is hit, we can have some validations based on the data that we are returning. Okay, so let me show you. What I'll do is I'll just simply create a class. Let's say a room. It has a field private long ID. and let's say there is another field assigned to. Alright, I will add some getter, setter and constructor as well. These are the getter, setter, and let me also add a constructor, generate a constructor for both the fields. Alright, so in this room controller, let's say this API, instead of a string, it returns a room object. Okay, and what I'm doing is I'm simply returning a room, passing the ID, and let's say I say that the room is assigned to curious coder. Okay, this is the user whom I have assigned the room. Now I have not yet authenticated it. I have not yet authorized it to say that okay, this is assigned to the curious coder, because here I am saying that it could be any role. It could be admin, staff, or guest. But let's say based on this return type, based on the data that I am returning, I want to add some authorization. So that I can do using a post authorize. I just simply have to write @post authorize return object. Here I will have to write it like this: return object, this represents this object, dot this field assigned to. Okay, I can just call it assigned to. Alright, this is just one example, and I am saying that this should be equal to authentication dot name. Okay, so authentication object we already have somewhere in Spring Security, and I'm saying that this assigned to should be equal to authentication dot name. So whichever user is logged in at this point of time, whichever user is actually hitting this API, that user's name should be equal to the name which is here in the assigned to. Okay, so I'll just rerun and show you. Alright, so I will generate a token first for the curious coder, and let me not generate for the, let's generate for the curious coder. So this one is admin. Okay, and as we know, admin has the access. Actually every role has the access here. Okay, and I will just simply call this method add room, not add room per se, this room /1. Okay, so when I hit it, I'm able to access it. Okay, but if I change it to the curious coder 2, and now if I generate the token, alright, now it says 403 forbidden. Okay, why? Because even though the role was allowed, even though staff was allowed, but the name, the authentication name, the username was actually the curious coder 2. Alright, it was the curious coder 2. So it didn't match the return object dot assigned to. The assigned to value is the curious coder. Alright, so these kind of validations we can add using @post authorize. Basically it works on the returning data. So if you want any kind of validation on the returning data, you can use post authorize. Alright, and in this case the interface that is used, basically the class that is used, is this one, this post authorize authorization manager. Okay, now so far we have seen how we can implement the authorization using roles. Now let's see how we can do the same using permissions. Okay, so before we start with permissions, let me make a small change. Instead of this string roles, instead of this string role, I will just create an enum for the role. Alright, so we can just create an enum like this, role, and here I will add all the 3 roles that I have configured. Okay, so role underscore admin, role underscore staff, and role underscore guest. Alright, so this will be actually very handy when we'll talk about permissions. Okay, so that's why I'm making this change. So instead of this role, instead of the string in the user entity, I'll just change it to role. Okay, and I will have to add this annotation @enumerated enum type dot string. So this means that in the DB we have to save it as a string. Alright, okay, now instead of string, here I will change it to role. Similarly, I'll change the getter and setters role, and this will also be of the type role. Okay, now we are using these things at couple of places. So in this user service, we are using this user.getRole. So I just have to write .name. Okay, so this name will give me the string value of that role. Alright. Similarly, I think it is used someplace else as well. I think in the filter. Yeah. So here I was creating this simple granted authority, this role that we are passing in the security context. So here also I'll just do role.name. Alright. I think it is just a simple string role here as of now. Okay, so we don't have to make this change. Alright. So now in the JWT token as well, where I'm generating the token, here I will not change it to enum. I'll keep it same only. I'll keep it as a string key value pair. Alright. Now what exactly is a permission? So let me just create another enum and explain it to you using that enum only. So I can just create an enum for permission, and I can add values like read underscore or room underscore add, room underscore view, and room underscore view all. Okay, something like that. All right. So when we are talking about roles, we are saying that a user is assigned to some role. Okay, so roles are kind of different types of users, and permission is something that those users are permitted to do. Okay, so our roles were guest and admin, or it could be a staff. Okay, but what operations that they can perform, that we define in the permission. Okay, so whether they can add a room, or they can view a room, or they could view all the rooms, these kind of things are defined in permissions. Okay, so somehow I will have to map these permissions with these roles. So how can I do that? I will just take a field, let's say private final. I'll take a set of permissions and call it permissions. Okay, all right. And let me just create a constructor, and I will also create us a getter method, okay, for this permissions. All right, so here I will just pass all the permissions. It will be set.off, so the permission dot room add. Okay, so admin will have all the permissions. All right, then this will be permission dot room view, comma, permission dot room view all. Okay, let me just do it like this. Okay, so I have mapped this role with all these three permissions. All right, similarly here also I can add a couple of permissions. So this is a staff member, so I will give it a permission to view the room and to view all the rooms. Okay, but it will not have the permission to add the room. All right, similarly this guest will only have one permission, that is permission to view only a single room. All right, so this is how we can map a role with some permissions. And what exactly is changed in this, I'll tell you. In the controller, in this controller, instead of giving this authorization on the basis of role, what I'll do is I'll just comment this out and I'll change it to permission. Okay, so I'm saying that this add room, this API can only be accessed by anyone who has the permission as add room. Okay, so I'm saying the permissions are also stored in authority. So I will just add, let me just check, the name was room underscore add. Okay, so here I will pass room underscore add. All right, and permission does not have any prefix. Okay, we can just directly write the name. All right, similarly I'll remove this get room by ID. It should be accessed by anyone who has this permission, has authority. Let me just copy paste this, and this will be room underscore view. Okay, similarly I'll remove this and this will be room underscore view underscore all. Alright, so we are kind of doing the same thing. It's actually exactly the same thing, but the approach is a bit different. What we are doing here is that we have mapped these APIs with the permission. Okay, so we are authorizing them on the basis of permission, and that actually makes kind of more sense. Okay, we are saying that anyone can access this API, add room, anyone who has the permission to add the room. Okay, and anyone who has the permission to view this room can actually access this API. Similarly, anyone who has the permission to view all the rooms can access this get rooms API. Okay, and at the user level, we are mapping that user with a role. We are not mapping user directly with the permission. We are mapping user with this role only, and this role is further mapped with permission. So we are saying that admin has all these three permission, staff has these two permission, and guest has the permission to view the room. Alright, so it is kind of decoupled now, and there is one more thing that I have to do. I'm using has authority. So we have added the roles in authorities. Similarly, we also have to add the permissions in the authorities. Okay, so that I will do. So one place is this in the user service. You can see that we have added the role. So in the same way, we will actually have to add the permissions as well. So how can I do that? I'll just create a list of authorities like this is equal to new array list. Alright, let me just import. First, let me add the role. I'm also keeping role as well, so that if you want to give a role based authentication, that also you can do, but we'll also add the permissions. Okay, so this I will add here. Alright, so first I've added the role in this list. Now how can I get permissions? Very simple, we can get it using the role only. Okay, so here we get the set of permissions. I'll just loop on it. For every permission, what I'll do, I will just add it in the authorities. Okay, so authorities.add new simple granted authority, and here I will add the permission. Okay, permission.name, because that is also an enum. Alright, simple. So now this list of authorities has both roles as well as permissions. Okay, so here in this authorities, in the user details object, basically, I will just add authorities. Great. And there is one more change here in this JWT filter as well. We were adding the role in this token, this username password authentication token. So here also we were adding these authorities. So I will just fetch. Okay, so I have this role. First, let me convert it into an enum role.value of role. Okay, so instead of taking role, I'll just directly take it like this. Let me copy and paste. Alright, I'll remove this role. Great. So now I have a role of I have this role of type this enum. Okay, and using this I can again fetch. First, let me just show you here. In this list, I have added the role, and this role is of string type. So actually I will have to add role prefix here. I'll show you why. Basically, when we are doing this claims.get, at this point of time, we are fetching from the JWT token. Okay, so from the JWT token, we will only get the suffix part. We will get admin. Okay, so then I have to add role underscore. We have to add that thing, and then only it will be converted into the actual enum, because in the enum we already have the prefix. Okay, then only it will be mapped with the enum. Okay, so here now we have the role, and now again I don't need to add it. I can just simply say role.name. Okay, simple, because now this enum already has the prefix. Okay, enum already contains the prefix. Alright, so in this list of authorities, I have added the role. Similarly, I will also have to add the permissions. Okay, so how can I do that? I will just again fetch the permissions from this enum, and I will loop on it. For every permission, I simply have to just add it in the list. Okay, dot add permission dot name. Okay, simple. Alright, so this is, yeah, my bad, it will be of type new simple granted authority. Okay, this is of the type simple granted authority. We'll create an object, And in this object, we'll add the permission. Okay, great. Yeah, so this is wrapped with some array list. All right, cool. So what I have done is I have added the role as well as I have added the permissions. And here we are just passing this list, simple granted authorities. Okay, that's it. It's simple. Now what I can do, I have registered the roles and permissions. I have changed my authorization in the room controller. Okay, this has been changed to has authority and we have just configured it using the permissions. Now I will just simply okay, one thing I think I have to make the change. In the user entity, I have added it as a role. So in the user controller also, yeah, here I will face this issue because I have taken it as a string, but instead I will have to take it as a role. Okay, like this. So we are going to pass an enum, but because we have this annotation at the rate enumerated, so in the database it will automatically convert it into a string. Okay, so now let me rerun my project. Alright, the application is up. So in the database, I already have the roles. Okay, it is already in string. So actually I didn't need to change it, but I will show you again as well. Okay, so I'll just simply delete from users limit 3. And now my DB is empty and I can simply register my users. So how will I register? Again, I'll pass the username, password and the role. All right, and it will be the same entry. Okay, the curious coder and the role is admin. Similarly, the curious coder 2, here the role will be staff. Okay, so you can see we are not giving any permissions. We are just adding the role to the user because to the user we map only role. And then that role is further mapped with the permissions. Okay, this is how we have decoupled this thing. Okay, so now the role is staff and similarly the role is guest. All right, so in the database we have all the 3 users, curious coder 1, 2 and 3. All right, now what will we do? I can just generate a token for the curious coder first. Okay, so this one is the admin and we can see that admin has all the permissions. Okay, so ideally we should be able to access all the APIs. I'll just paste the token here. And if I'm trying to access this, I can access this. Good. Then we have this get rooms and we have rooms.id. Great. Now let me just generate token for the curious coder 2. Okay, so at this point in the API level, we are working with users and that is why we are working with roles. But the authorization is taking place using permissions. Okay, that is the decoupling. Now for the curious coder 2, I have this token and if I just paste it here, so the token, this one is actually a staff and staff has view and view all permissions. Okay, so this is the view API, I'm able to access it. This is the view all API, I'm able to access this as well. And this is the add API, this is forbidden. Okay, similarly let's do it for the third one as well, the curious coder 3. All right, this time this is the add room API, it can't be accessed. This is the get all rooms API, this also can't be accessed. But if I'll try with some ID, then great, this can be accessed. Okay, so this is how we can actually authorize using the permissions. So at the controller level, we have given the authorization using permissions, and actually you could have used permissions as well as roles parallelly as well. Okay, simultaneously, that also you can do, because in the authorities you have registered both roles as well as permissions. Okay, so this is kind of a different way of achieving the same thing, but I wanted to teach you about both the ways. All right, so this is it about authorization. This is it about roles and permissions. Okay, you should definitely try this implementation on your own, and I hope this video was helpful. So for more such content, please stay tuned and follow my channel, The Curious Coder. Hello and welcome to my channel, The Curious Coder. This video is part of my Spring Security series. In this video, we are going to understand OAuth 2 from absolute scratch. And I'll explain it in a way that you have probably never seen before. I'll walk you through every single step of what happens behind the scenes with the OAuth 2 mechanism. And then we'll implement the same in a Spring Boot application. Alright, so what exactly is OAuth 2? It is an authorization framework that allows a third-party application to securely access a user's resources from an authorization server without sharing the user's credentials. Okay, so it's a bit heavy and complicated definition. Let me just break it down and we'll try to understand it using a real world example. Imagine you're on a website, let's say LeetCode, and you want to sign in. You can either create your own credentials on LeetCode or you see an option that says sign in with Google. Let's say you choose this sign in with Google option. In this scenario, you are the user. Google acts as the authorization server because it has your Google credentials, and LeetCode is a third-party application, or we can also call it a client. Okay. Now, how does this sign-in actually work? Does Google share your username and password with LeetCode? No, it does not, and it should never do that because sharing credentials with a third-party application is risky. The client could be compromised or even malicious, which would give someone direct access to your Google account. That's exactly why the OAuth 2 protocol is there. Instead of sharing your actual credentials, the authorization server, which in this case is Google, will issue an access token. Alright, so it won't share the credentials. Instead, it will share an access token. Now using this access token, the client application, which in this case is LeetCode, will be able to access the user's resources, such as your email ID or some profile icon, whatever Google allows. Okay, but they will never know your Google password. Alright, that's the protocol. So it seems easy. Instead of the credentials, an access token has to be sent, but in reality, it is a little complicated than that because there are a lot of steps involved in this process. There is a complete OAuth 2 flow that has to be followed to achieve this. So now I'm going to teach you about that flow. Alright, let's start with the OAuth 2 flow. Initially, the user is on LeetCode's website and it clicks on sign in with Google. At this point, internally, an authorization API is hit. Now, whose API is this? This API is of Google and it was hit by the LeetCode front end. Okay, because we are on the LeetCode website, so LeetCode's front end will hit this API and this API was owned by Google. Okay, it's a Google's API. Now, what's in this API? In the payload, we have a field named client ID, redirect URI, scope, response type, and a state. Okay, these are the fields. Let me explain them one by one. Now see, there is a third-party application LeetCode and it is trying to access some information from Google. Okay, but Google cannot share this information with any random third-party application, right? At least it should know who is trying to access all these details. Okay, so for that, initially, these third-party applications have to register them as a client on Google. Okay, then only Google will allow them to access the user's resources. Okay, so at some point of time, LeetCode must have registered itself as a user, and at that time, Google must have given it some credentials. Okay, a client ID and a client secret. So that is what a client ID is. It is a unique identifier that tells the authorization server which client is requesting the access. Okay. Now, what's a redirect URI? As a user, you were on a LeetCode page, and then when you click on sign in with Google, you'll go to some Google's page. Okay. At some point in future, you want to return back to LeetCode. Okay, because actually you're trying to open LeetCode. Okay. So LeetCode has to send Google an API that it will hit sometime in future. Alright, so that is generally called a callback URL. So redirect URI is basically the client's callback URL, which the authorization server will call in future. Okay. Now coming to scope. Scope is where you define the list of items that you actually want to access. Okay, so let's say if LeetCode wants the information like username and profile, so In the scope, it will add username and profile. Okay. So it basically is a list of permissions defining what access the client is requesting. Okay. Now response time is something that specifies what kind of response the client expects. It could be an authorization code or it could be access token. Okay. So I'll explain this to you in some future steps. You'll get to know what exactly is the difference between authorization code and an access token. Okay, but here we configure in what format we need basically what kind of response we need. Okay, what kind of response the client needs. All right. So as of now, I'll keep the value as code. Okay, which means authorization code. Okay. Now state is a random value which is used to maintain the request integrity. Meaning that at this point, when the client hits the authorization server's API, they will send a random unique value. Okay, and when in future Google will hit the LeetCodes API, at that point also they will send something in the state and those values should be equal. Okay, this is how both the servers will know that the request is a valid request and it is not coming from some hacker or someplace outside. Okay, so it is meant for safety purpose. Now one thing to note here is that LeetCode will not get anything in the response of this API. This is not the time when LeetCode will get the access token or even the authorization code. Okay, so there is no response to this API. Instead, we are redirected to another screen, and this actually brings me to the step 2, that we are on the consent screen. Okay, so what is a consent screen? Basically, Google will not share your details to some third-party application before you give it permission to do so. Okay, so that's why it brings you to a consent page where it asks for your permission that it is about to share some details of yours to LeetCode, and do you actually want to share these details? Okay, so only after you give your consent, then only Google will authorize the third-party application. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'll actually go to LeetCode and I'll show you these steps happening in real time. Okay, so let's say I am on the LeetCode website. Okay, I'm already logged in. Let me just sign out. All right. Yeah. So let's say I'm on the LeetCode website and I'm trying to sign in. All right. So here is the option to sign in with Google. What I'll do is let me just inspect the element in the network tab and let's keep it to all. Okay. So when I click on sign in with Google, okay, so you can see that this API was hit, and this API is actually the authorization API that I was talking about. Okay, so in the payload, we have these details, the client ID, redirect URI, scope, response time, and some state. Okay, so this is some client ID of LeetCode. Then we have this redirect URI. Basically, this is the callback URI which will be hit at some time in future by Google. Okay, so you can see that this is LeetCode's API that will be hit at some point in future. Then scope is email, which means LeetCode is asking for the email ID from Google, and response type is code, which means that we are into the authorization code flow. Okay, so this will see in future in some APIs that how it is working. And this is some unique identifier, which also you should keep a note of, because I'll show it to you that when this is actually called again, when this is sent again. Okay, so here in this API, you can see all these details. Now after that, we are on the screen. I select my email ID. Okay, and let me just close all this. So here we are on the step 2, where there is a consent form. Okay, so Google is asking the user, which in this case is me, that will I allow LeetCode to access the information about me? Okay, so what information? This is my email ID. All right. Now the next user action will be that the user will click on continue. And at this point, internally, the callback URL will be hit. Okay. The redirect URI that LeetCode shared to Google, that URI will be hit this time. So who is the owner of this API? The owner of this API is LeetCode, and this one will be hit by Google. Okay, so this time the roles are reversed. So now Google will hit this API, and in the payload of this API, it will send the fields like authorization code and the state, and there will be a few more fields, but mainly we are focused on authorization code and the state. Okay, so in the first API, when the Auth API was hit, Google will not share the code in that API. Okay, it was not sharing it in the response. Instead, when it hits the callback API, at that point of time in the payload, it sends the authorization code. Okay, so this is something that you should keep a note about, that this authorization code is actually sent in the callback API. And there is one more thing. This authorization code is different from the access token. Okay, lead code still does not have the access token. This code is entirely different and access token is something different. Okay, so access token will come into play in some future steps. But as of now, you should know that the authorization code has been sent back to lead code. Alright. And in the state, there will be the exact same value that was there in the authorization API. So let me show you. We were on this step. I will just delete this part and click on continue. Alright. So you can see a lot of APIs have been hit. There is this callback API. It's the same API that was configured in the authorization API. Okay, so when the auth API was hit, this one was sent in the redirect URI field, and now Google has hit this API, and in the payload you can see that it sent the state. The state value is exactly the same which was there when the auth API was hit, and here you can see the authorization code. Okay, again please note that this is not the access token. Okay, this is just the authorization code. Alright, now one thing you can observe here is that we have got the access. Okay, as a user, I'm on the lead code screen, and now I can able to, I've been logged in on lead code and I'm able to access this page. Okay, you can see that I'm logged in. So does that mean that the process is over? Okay, did lead code actually get the access token? So the answer is yes and yes. Lead code got the access token, but there were a few steps that were involved here which you were not able to see. Okay, so the access token was shared, but you were not able to see that, and that's actually the beauty of this approach. Okay, that is why it is so secure, that these steps actually happened internally and you cannot see these steps here in the browser. Okay, so let me explain these steps one by one. Now the step 4 is that a fetch token API will be hit. Now whose API is this? It's Google's API. But when was it called? We just saw on the browser that the last thing that happened was callback API was hit, and after that the access was granted. Right. So who hit this API and when was it hit? So actually this API will be hit by LeetCode's backend server. Okay. How? When Google hit the callback API, after that the flow went to LeetCode's backend. Right. Because the callback API is written in the backend logic. Okay, in LeetCode backend server. So at that point of time, LeetCode's backend server will hit this fetch token API. Okay, this is called an S2S call, basically a server to server call. So LeetCode's backend server hits the Google server, and at this point fetch token API is hit. Okay, so what's in the payload? In the payload, there is the authorization code, there is a client ID, and there is a client secret. Okay, so when the request lands on the Google server, it sees that there is an authorization code. So it understands that it is the same code that Google shared to LeetCode. So it means that access has to be given. Right. And using the client ID and the client secret, the server validates the client's credentials. Okay, it just validates that whether it is a valid client or not. Okay. And then in the response of this API, it shares the access token. Okay. This is how it works. I'll repeat. LeetCode's backend server hits the Google's fetch token API, and in the payload, it sends the authorization code, the client ID, and the client secret. And in the response of this API, access token is shared to LeetCode, okay, by Google. Alright. Now still, LeetCode does not have information about the user's profile or user's email. It only has the access token. But using this access token, it can get this information. Alright, so Google has exposed many APIs which anyone can hit, and if they have the access token, Google will share that information. Okay, so let's say the LeetCode backend server hits the Google's fetch profile API, and in the payload it will pass the access token, and in the response of that API, Google will return the user's profile information. Okay, this is the complete flow. Let me just repeat it from the starting. In the beginning, the user is on LeetCode's website and clicks on sign in with Google. At this point, authorization API is hit. Then user is shown that consent screen where it allows Google to share its information. At this point, callback API is hit and Google shares the authorization code to LeetCode. Alright, now the logic is at LeetCode's backend. Here they make a service to service call to Google and the fetch token API is hit. Alright, in the payload of this API, LeetCode sends the authorization code, the client ID and the client secret, and in the response, Google sends back the token, okay, the access token. Now using this access token, LeetCode can fetch the user information by hitting the fetch profile API. Okay, so this is the complete end-to-end OAuth flow. Now there is one question that still needs to be answered. Why is there authorization code in this whole flow? LeetCode could have directly taken the access token and would have got the access, right? So the answer is that you must have observed when we were inspecting the callback API, at that point of time, we were able to see the authorization code in the browser, right? We could see that code, and similarly, instead of authorization code, if Google would have sent the access code directly in the callback API, then anyone could access that as well. Okay, so it's not safe. That is why the process is written in this way that first a code will be sent in the callback API, then rest of the process will be done at the backend level. Okay, so that it is safe. Now you might argue that someone might steal the authorization code and then they can hit the Google's API and they can fetch the access token, right? But the point is, in the fetch token API, they also need a client secret. And that secret is always saved at backend only. Okay, that is why no one can steal the access token even if they get the authorization code. Alright, now this logic is a bit difficult to understand and you might not see this explanation in most of the tutorials. So my recommendation is just pause the video, listen to it twice or thrice and try to understand this logic. Okay, and then in the comment section, let me know if you understood this part. Alright, okay, let's move ahead. Now let's see how we can actually implement OAuth 2 in our Spring Boot application. So I have created a brand new project, this OAuth client service application. In the POM file, I have added 3 dependencies, Spring Boot Starter Web, we have Spring Boot Starter Security, and we have added Spring Boot Starter OAuth 2 client. Alright, so this is the dependency that helps your project be registered as a client, okay, as an OAuth 2 client. Okay, so I just told you that we have to perform a certain steps if we want to achieve the OAuth 2 mechanism. Alright, so we need a callback API. At some point we have to hit the fetch token API. At some point we have to hit the auth API. Alright, so these are some of the steps that we need to do. So do we really need to do all this on our own? No, we don't have to write that code on our own because we are in a Spring Boot application and here we work with dependencies and configurations. Okay, so this dependency is the answer to all of that. You just have to add this and then add a few configurations and everything will be done automatically. Alright, that's the beauty of this dependency. Okay, so let me just show you. What I'll do is in my application.yaml, I'll be adding some configurations. Okay, not Spring, yeah. So, alright, so we just added this configuration spring.security.oauth2.client.registration.google. Okay, here we are giving the client ID. As of now, I've just kept a placeholder, then a client secret. Our authorization grant type is authorization code. Okay, we are keeping it as the code, not the access token. Then we have a scope. In the scope, we are asking for profile and email. Okay, so these are the two things that we are asking from Google. Then this is for the registration part. Now here we are configuring some URLs. Okay, so this one is the Google's authorization API that will hit to fetch the authorization code. Okay, so we'll not hit it explicitly. That dependency that we added will do it automatically. Okay, we just have to configure this URL here. Okay, similarly there is the token URI. This also will be done internally, and here we have the user profile API which will actually fetch the user information. Okay, so you see it is that simple. We just have to give these configurations and have to add this dependency, and all our work will be done. All right, now here instead of this ID and secret, I need an actual client ID and an actual client secret. So first thing that I need to do is I have to register my application as a client for Google. All right, so let's do that. I'll go to console.cloud.google.com. Okay, this one, Google Cloud Console. Here we can select a project. Okay, first I need to agree and continue. Okay, here I can select a project. As of now I don't have any project, so I will create a new project. Okay, we can name it something, it's fine, I'll keep it like this, and I will just create this project. All right, it's taking a while. Yeah, it's done. I'll just select this project now, and here I am on this screen. Okay, so in this left sidebar we have this API and services. Here we'll go into this option, credentials. All right, you can see there are two options. There is an OAuth consent screen also. We'll go here as well, but first let's go to this credentials. All right, got it. Yeah, so here I will try to create some credentials, and I will try to create an OAuth client ID. Okay, when I select this, great, it will just open this page, and it actually is saying that before creating a client ID, I must configure my consent screen. All right, so consent screen I have already told you about. It will be that screen that will appear to the user, to the end user, that my application is about to share this, share that user's information from Google to the third party application. Okay, actually Google is going to share that information to the third party application, which in this case is our application that we are creating. So for that we need to configure a consent screen, that what exactly should be shown to the user. Okay, so I'll just click over here, get started. Great, so we can give some application name. Let's say I give Spring OAuth, okay, something like this, OAuth 2. Here I will give my email ID, tech.learning9868. Okay, then next. Okay, what type is our audience? So I'll keep it as external. Okay, I don't have any organization, so I'll just keep it that available to test any user with a Google account. All right, so I've kept it external. Then here again I will give the same email ID, tech.learning9868@gmail.com. okay, tech.learning, yeah, next, finish, and great. All right, so I have configured my consent screen. Now I can create the OAuth client. Okay, my application type is a web application. We have a web backend application. Okay, I can give a name here as well. Let's call this as well, Spring OAuth application. Let's call it like this. Okay, or demo application, something like this. All right, and now we see that there is an option to add the URI. Okay, authorized redirect URIs. So I've already told you about the redirect URI. This is where we give a callback API that will be hit. That will be our API, our applications API, and it will be hit by Google. Okay, so here I can just add, I have one callback API, this localhost 8080/login/OAuth2/code/Google. All right, so how did I get it? As I told you, everything is already done by the dependency by our Spring application. Okay, so this is the default callback API that it provides, and it is configurable. You can just make changes in your application.yaml and you can give a different name. Okay, but I'll just use the default one. So this we already have because of our dependency. Okay, so I've added this URI and that's it. I'll just create it. Great. So a client ID has been generated and a client secret has been generated. Okay, so for just to remember it, I'll download it as well, and let me copy paste. This is the client ID. Okay, here let me add it, the client ID, and this is the client secret. All right, like this. Now there is one more thing that is actually left to do. There is this data access. Okay, what data I want to access. So here we can add the scopes. All right, so in the scopes I will add two things, the email and the profile. Okay, I can just select these, we'll update, and here don't forget to save this. Great. So this is all done. We have created a client ID and a client secret, and we have configured our scopes as well. Okay, and one more thing that we do was we gave it our redirect URI as well. All right, so now coming back to this application, I've added the ID and secret over here. Okay, now is that all? Have I just configured everything and I can simply start with my application? So no, there is one thing left. What we have done over here is we have registered ourselves as a client, and we have also configured the URLs that will be hit internally in the whole process. But as of now, we have not integrated this part with Spring Security. All right, what I mean is that when we added this dependency, this Spring Boot Starter OAuth 2 client, we got this filter. Okay, this OAuth 2 login authentication filter. All right, so this is a class that you can see that we get from OAuth 2. Okay, so you can consider that this is the class which is responsible for all the internal logic. Okay, the fetch token API hit, the auth API hit, the callback API, everything is happening somewhere internally from here. Okay, basically this filter, and then it calls some provider. So that is a whole internal architecture, but you can think of it like this, that this class is somehow responsible. Okay, but the thing is that this filter is not part of our security filter chain. Okay, so when we add this Spring Boot Starter security dependency, it gives us a security filter chain. And for any authentication to be part of our application, that filter has to be added in this security filter chain. Okay, so this I've told about in my previous videos as well, that there is a security filter chain, and whatever filter you want, whatever type of authentication you want, you have to add in that filter chain. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll create a class security config, and I will annotate it with @configuration and then @enable web security. And here I will have to create this bean. Okay, this bean for security filter chain. Okay, so this also we have done in our previous videos. I'll just repeat it here as well. It's very simple. I'll tell you what exactly we are trying to achieve here. So in this security filter chain, I have somehow added this OAuth 2 login authentication filter. How? By using this. Here I have customized this OAuth 2 login. This means that any API that now goes through our application, they have to go through this OAuth 2 authentication. Okay, so this is how we configure it. This is some CSRF. So it's for CSRF attack. I have disabled it. This I've told in some other video. Okay, we are keeping it disabled. Then we are saying that every request has to be authenticated. And here we are saying what will be the authentication mechanism? The mechanism will be OAuth 2 login. Okay, simple. This piece of code has now integrated OAuth 2 with Spring Security. Okay, and by integration I mean this filter, this authentication filter has been added in the security filter chain. Okay, great. So now my application is ready. I have given the configurations here. I have my dependencies. I have a security config, and I just simply need to run my application. All right. So code wise, if you think, we have not done much. We have made minimal changes and we have, a ready application. Okay. So one thing is missing, that we have not created any APIs. Okay. We have to create the APIs that we want to authenticate. So let me just create a controller. I'll simply add the REST controller. I'll add simple APIs, public string hello, and we'll map it to some URL. Let's say /hello. This will return hello world. Okay, Similarly, I'll also create a few more APIs. /hi. This will be hi world. Similarly, we have /hey, and this will be hey world. Alright, so I've added 3 APIs and I'll try to access these APIs using my browser. Alright, so my application is up. HTTP localhost 8080/hello. Okay, I'll try to hit this API. Great. So you can see that I'm redirected to the Google page. Okay, because we have enabled OAuth 2 in our application and we have also integrated it with Spring Security. So whenever I'll try to hit an API, I will be redirected here. Okay, at first I will be redirected here. I select my email ID. Great. Here you can see the consent page that we created. It's saying that Google will be sharing the name and profile picture and the email address. Okay, so if I want to grant access, I will click on continue. And great, I have the API is hit. Alright, so this is how we can integrate OAuth 2 in our application. And now every time my API, I will hit my API, will be needing this. Not every time, actually that is the thing that I wanted to show you. If I hit this API again, let's say I hit /hello again, now you won't be needing it. Why? Because in the process, the last step is that after the application gets the user information, it saves it at their end. Okay, so now my application has the user information, and for the future API calls, I won't be needing this authentication again and again. In fact, if I just hit a different API, let's say I try to hit /hi, even this API won't be needing this authentication because this application, localhost in this case, has all the information about user. Okay, and user needed some OAuth 2 login that we have already done once. Alright, similarly, if I hit /hey, there won't be any problem. Okay, so this is because the application keeps the user information somewhere in here in the application only. Okay, so I'll show you where exactly it is placed. Okay, so for that I'll create one more API, this one. I'll just explain this. Let me import authentication principal and OAuth 2 user. Great. So I have created an API whose URL is /me. In this API, we have this object of OAuth 2 user. Alright, so this is where actually Spring Boot saves the user information. We have it inside this object. From this object, I can just fetch it using .get attribute. Okay, we have name, email, and picture, and I can map it in some response. Okay, and this annotation @authentication principal, what it is doing is it is fetching this information from the security context and putting it inside this object. Okay, so actually the information is saved in the security context, and from there we can fetch it. Okay, so let me just rerun my project. Alright, and I'll do one more thing. I will just forget this application again so that I can show you all the steps. So how can we do that? I'll just go to a different tab. We have this account. Okay, here there is third-party connections. So I will just forget this Spring OAuth 2. Okay, this you can see that it has already made a connection with Google. Okay, with my Google account. So I will just delete all the connections that it has. Confirm. Great. So now if I try to hit the API, again we are landing on this page. Okay, so I'll just hit localhost 8080/me. Alright, I have to check out this, click on this email ID and again grant the access. Great. So this is my API. You can see the response. The application has the name, okay, Shivam Gupta, then email, and this is the picture. Okay, so I have not added any picture, but I'll still copy this link and you can see that this S icon is showed. Okay, this one. Alright, so this is how we can fetch the user's information. It is saved inside this object OAuth 2 user. So this is something that you should know. And actually we are fetching it from the security context. Alright, so I can show you that as well. Like I'll comment this out. this or not comment this out. I can simply, okay, let me just remove this thing. And we have this something called security context holder. I have told about this in my previous videos. So every type of authentication that we do, we always save it in this security context. Okay, so .get context .get authentication. This will give me an authentication object. Using this authentication, I can get the principal. All right, and it will be of the type OAuth to user. So I will just extract a variable. Let's call it user. Okay, so actually this is what I was doing. From the security context, I was fetching the context, then the authentication object, and using this authentication object, we can fetch the principal, which is where the user resides. Okay, and then using this user, we can add all the information in the response. All right, so instead of doing this, I just used some annotation. Okay, so this is all about OAuth 2. I hope this video was helpful. Please follow my channel, The Curious Coder, for more such content.